He was born in the quiet aftermath of the war, but the galaxy wasn't quiet. Not really, not in the Force, not in the hearts of the people, and certainly not in the life waiting for Ben Solo. They named him after Obi-Wan, a Jedi who once saved the galaxy by letting go of everything he loved. But Ben Solo wasn't raised in the ways of the Jedi, not at first. He was raised in a house still echoing with blaster fire and battlefield ghosts. His mother, Leia Organa, carried the weight of two galaxies, one that died with Alderaan, and one she tried to rebuild from ashes. His father, Han Solo, was a smuggler who never meant to become a hero, a man who could shoot first, fly through anything, but never outrun the shadows in his past. Ben didn't understand it yet, but he was born into legend, not just bloodline but burden. To the galaxy, he was a symbol, a union of Skywalker and Solo, a living promise that hope still had a future. But to Ben, he was just a boy, and the Force was never quiet. Even in infancy, he could feel too much. Rooms shifted when he cried. People trembled when he laughed. The Force bent around him like breath on glass, never stable, never calm. Leia feared it, not because she didn't love him, but because she remembered her father. She remembered how power without peace could twist love into control, could turn passion into fire, and a sun into a shadow. She wanted to protect him from that. But she didn't tell Han who Ben really was. Not at first, not what she sensed growing inside him. And that silence would be the first crack. Because Ben wasn't just the son of Leia and Han. He was the grandson of Anakin Skywalker. And even though the Jedi Temple was gone and Palpatine had fallen, the Force still remembered. It always remembers. As Ben grew, the galaxy tried to move on, but it never asked if he could move with it. The rebellion had won, but for Ben Solo, the war was still inside the walls of his home. And the Force, it waited, watching, whispering. Sometimes, when he dreamed, he saw his grandfather, not as a Jedi, but as the thing he became. And Ben didn't understand what that meant. Only that something deep, ancient, and wrong was listening, waiting. The first time Leia held him, she sensed it too. A tremor. Not dark, not light. Just too much. Too much power for one child. Too much fear. Too much history. No one told Ben what he was supposed to become. But everyone expected it. And by the time he was old enough to understand his name, he already hated it. Ben Solo. A name tied to every hope the galaxy had left. But he wasn't hope. He was afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of hurting. Afraid of being alone. And in the quiet between those fears, the whisper came back, calling him. Softly, lovingly, like it knew him better than anyone ever could. And maybe it did. Because when you're born from a war, raised in a lie, and destined to carry a name that was never yours to choose, the only thing louder than the galaxy's expectations is the whisper telling you to run, or to burn, or to become something else entirely. And in the Force, something ancient stirred. Watching, patient. Ben Solo was still just a boy. But the shadows had already found him. The galaxy thought peace had returned. But peace is not the absence of war. It's the silence that follows, the kind that hides the wounds no one wants to look at. Ben Solo grew up in that silence. The war had ended, but the scars never left. The rebellion had won. The Empire had fallen. But the shadows of both lived on in the cracks of the New Republic and in the memories of those who survived. Leia Organa had become a leader, again, not because she wanted to, but because no one else could. Even in peacetime, she stood in war rooms, gave speeches, rebuilt fleets. She was Alderaan's daughter, and its last echo. Han Solo didn't belong there. He had traded smuggling for fatherhood, but fatherhood didn't come with a map, and nothing in the galaxy had ever taught Han how to be still. So he didn't stay still. He flew. He wandered. He told stories of battles he barely survived and worlds that no longer existed. But when he came home, Ben was always older, and always more distant. Ben loved his parents, but love wasn't enough. They were symbols, legends, carved into galactic history like stars burned into the night. But legends can't tuck you in. They can't make the noise in your head stop. And they can't hear the Force when it starts to whisper. Ben could. From the age of 4, he felt it move in his bones. Not gently but like a storm just beneath his skin. He didn't tell anyone. Not at first. Because even then, something inside him said no one would understand. He was right. He tried to be normal, to smile at droids, to listen when his mother spoke, to play when other children asked. But there was always something else, watching, inside him, around him, pulling his thoughts toward places that felt cold and old and endless. One day, he screamed in his sleep, a name he didn't know, a language no one recognized. His mother held him close. His father watched from the doorway, helpless. They never spoke of it again. The New Republic had no Jedi. Luke Skywalker had disappeared into legend, building a new order somewhere far from the politics, the Senate, the noise. Leia sent messages. Luke replied in silence. And so Ben stayed. In a galaxy that had moved on from Jedi and Sith, but never truly escaped them. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, Leia would sit outside his room, not as a senator, not as a general, but as a mother. She would listen, not to him, but to the Force. And sometimes she cried, because she knew what was coming. Not when, not how, but something ancient. She had felt it once in her father, and now she felt it in her son. But she didn't know how to stop it. And she didn't want to lose him by trying too hard to fix him. So she waited, hoping love would be enough. It wasn't. Ben was not violent, he was not angry. Not yet. But he was alone, surrounded by heroes, and unable to be one. Every planet they visited remembered Han's smirk. Every senator spoke of Leia's strength. Every holovid whispered of Skywalker blood. But Ben wasn't a smuggler. He wasn't a general. And he wasn't Luke. He was a child with a storm in his chest. One he didn't ask for. One no one could calm. And far away, in the unknown regions, something listened. It had been listening for years. Because the war wasn't over. It had simply gone quiet. And in that quiet, Ben Solo learned something terrible. Even when the galaxy heals, the Force remembers. And so do the shadows. The galaxy knew who he was before he did. Ben Solo. A name chosen with love and legacy. Ben, for the Jedi who once protected his family. Solo, for the man who had survived everything and still somehow kept running. But it was the name he didn't carry that weighed on him most. Skywalker. It was never spoken around him, not in full, but it hovered. In conversations cut short. In glances passed between his mother and uncle. in the silence that followed when he asked about his grandfather. Because the truth of his blood was not in books. It was in ruins. He had read the stories of Anakin Skywalker, Jedi General, Chosen One, hero of the Clone Wars. But they stopped before the fall. They never mentioned the Temple massacre, the slaughter of children, the breath of Vader in the dark. Ben knew something was missing, and the Force filled in the rest. Whispers, visions, pieces of a man's pain stitched into the current of time. When Ben closed his eyes, he didn't see victory. He saw fire. He heard a scream, mechanical, inhuman. He felt rage that wasn't his. And sometimes it felt like home. He didn't want to be like Vader, but no one ever told him he could be anything else. Luke Skywalker finally arrived when Ben turned 10. He looked different, older than the Holos, quieter than the legend. He offered peace, guidance, and the only path left, the path of the Jedi. Leia agreed. She hoped Luke could teach Ben how to live with the Force, how to quiet the storm, not silence it. Han said nothing. He didn't understand any of it. And deep down, he feared losing his son to something he couldn't fight. But Ben went, because he didn't know where else to go. The first time he touched a lightsaber, he felt like something was watching. Not Luke, not the students, but something older. As if the crystal inside the weapon remembered another hand, and that hand was his. Luke sensed it too. Ben was powerful, more than any student, more than Luke expected. And with that power came fear. Not Ben's, Luke's. He tried not to show it. He meditated longer, spoke slower, taught with care. But the Force revealed everything. And Ben could feel the shift. He began to wonder if the temple was a school or a prison. The other students whispered about him. Some admired him, others avoided him. All feared what he could become. So did he. He asked questions no one wanted to answer. Why did the Jedi fail? Why did Anakin fall? What is the dark side, really? Luke gave truths wrapped in silence. The Jedi had been arrogant, the Sith selfish, the Force balanced. But Ben didn't feel balanced. He felt broken. He wasn't evil. He didn't want to hurt anyone. But the more he tried to become what Luke needed, the more he felt himself disappearing. Because being a Jedi meant letting go. Letting go of anger, of fear, of attachment. But what if fear was the only thing keeping him together? What if he wasn't meant to let go? What if he was meant to change everything? Sometimes, late at night, he would walk beyond the temple walls, into the forest, into the quiet. And there, in the wind, he would hear it again. The voice, soft, ancient, patient. It didn't tell him to fight, or kill, or betray. It told him he was right. That the Jedi didn't understand him. That Luke would never trust him. That legacy is not destiny. But destiny always finds its way. And Ben listened, because for the first time, someone wasn't telling him what to be. They were telling him who he already was. And that felt true. The Jedi Temple was beautiful. High walls carved from stone. Meditation halls bathed in silence. Trees that bent with the wind but never broke. Luke Skywalker had built it far from the Senate, far from war, far from everything that once failed. But peace is not a place, and walls do not hold back the Force. Ben Solo stood in that light every day. He trained, he meditated, he listened. And still, the whisper found him. It came not as words, but feelings, shapes in the dark, memories that didn't belong to him, faces he'd never seen, yet somehow knew, 1,000 lifetimes of pain folded into a single voice. It called him by name. Not Ben, not Solo, something else, something that had no language, only weight. Luke saw the change. He spoke with calm words, steady breath, patient silence. But behind his eyes there was fear, not of Ben, but of what might be inside him. And that was worse. Ben tried to explain it once, about the voice, the feeling that something ancient was waiting, watching. But Luke's face grew cold, and his answers turned into riddles. The dark side lies. It tempts the wounded. You must resist. But Ben wasn't wounded. He was awake. The others didn't hear it, not the students, not the droids, not even Luke. Only Ben. Only him. And slowly, that made him believe something terrible. Maybe it was meant for him. Maybe it always had been. The Force was not light and dark, not to him. It was everything, the wind through the leaves, the tremor in his spine, the pulse before sleep, the fear when he woke. And in all of it, the voice waited. Never rushing, never screaming, just there. It told him the truth. That the Jedi feared power, that his family lied to protect him, that Luke would never see him as anything but a shadow. And part of him believed it. Because when he looked at his uncle, he didn't see trust. He saw calculation, worry, distance. And when he looked at himself, he didn't see a Jedi. He saw something breaking. Something no one could fix. He tried harder, meditated longer, cut himself off from the voice, buried it beneath training, obedience, silence. But the more he resisted, the closer it came. Until one night it stopped whispering and started speaking. It knew his name. It knew his blood. It knew the truth about Vader, not the myth, not the story, but the man. The Jedi never told him that Anakin had once loved, that he had tried to save someone, that he had fallen not out of hunger but out of grief. And Ben understood that grief. Because even surrounded by people, he felt alone. Every moment, every breath, the voice offered clarity. It didn't ask for loyalty, or devotion, or belief. It offered freedom from the lies, from the legacy, from the name. Ben Solo had tried to be everything they wanted, and none of it fit. So he began to wonder what would happen if he stopped trying, if he let the voice in, not to serve it, but to understand it, because deep in his heart, under the robes, behind the smile, there was a question no one could answer. What if I was never supposed to be a Jedi? And in that question, the voice waited, not with anger, but with promise. And in the shadows beyond the light, something shifted, something ancient, something patient, and the boy who once searched for peace began to drift. Not yet fallen, not yet turned, but listening, always listening. And the galaxy, busy rebuilding its walls, never heard the silence growing inside him. He was no longer a child. Ben Solo had grown taller, quieter, more controlled. But inside, nothing had calmed. The power still swirled beneath his skin, untamed, unyielding. The Jedi Temple offered structure, lightsaber forms, meditation, breathwork. But no training could silence the feeling that followed him everywhere. Everyone watched him. No one said it aloud, but he felt it. They looked at him like a prophecy in motion. The boy with the Skywalker gift, the Solo will, the Organa fire, and the Vader blood. It was never about who he was. It was always about whose he was. He wasn't a student. He was a symbol. And symbols are not allowed to break. But he was breaking. Not in violence. Not yet. In silence. Luke taught him with patience, corrected him with compassion. But even Luke's words carried weight, not as an uncle, but as a master. And in that distance, Ben felt the walls closing in. He didn't know where he fit, not with his parents, not with the students, not even with Luke. He wasn't like the others. They struggled with form. He moved like instinct. They searched for connection. He was overwhelmed by it. They feared failure. He feared himself. And every time he reached for understanding, all he found were more rules. Let go of fear. Let go of anger. Let go of everything. But how do you let go of something that is you? He wanted to ask, but asking meant doubt. Doubt meant fear, and fear led to. They never finished the sentence, as if saying it might bring it to life. But Ben already knew where the path led, because he was born from it. Leia didn't speak of her father, not directly. She had known him only as a tyrant, a shadow, a weapon. Her silence was protection. But to Ben, it felt like shame. And shame left questions unanswered. So he searched. He studied holocrons, dug through records the Republic had buried, names, systems, Jedi archives. He traced the path backward, from Vader, to Anakin, to Tatooine, to Pain. He saw the truth. Anakin Skywalker had been powerful, loved, broken, and then reborn in fire. Ben didn't admire it, but he understood it. Too much power, too much loss, too little control. The Jedi called it failure. Ben saw something else. The galaxy had never known what to do with Skywalkers. Not Anakin. Not Luke. Not him. So they turned them into myths, gave them robes, titles, chosen ones, and prayed they wouldn't burn everything down. But myths are lonely, and Ben was tired of being one. He longed for someone to see him not as a legend in the making, but as a person still becoming. No one did, except the voice. Still faint, still distant, but closer than before. He heard it when he trained, when he slept, when he bled. And it never called him by the names the others used. Not Padawan. Not Solo. Not even Ben. It called him nothing. And somehow that felt more honest. Because he didn't know who he was anymore. He wasn't a Jedi, not truly. He wasn't a son, not one who felt like he belonged. He wasn't a student. He wasn't a hero. He was floating, waiting. The Force moved through him like a question no one could answer. And somewhere in that uncertainty, the whisper began to grow. It no longer sounded like fear. It sounded like clarity. And clarity, when you're drowning in expectations, feels like hope. The whisper no longer waited for the night. It came during training, during meals, during silence. It came when he was alone. And when he wasn't, it came not as a warning, but as a companion. A presence without shape, without name, but not without purpose. Ben Solo had learned to fear the dark. The Jedi had taught him that. Fear led to anger. Anger led to hate. Hate to suffering. But what if the suffering came first? What if it was already there, before anything else? then maybe the dark wasn't the cause. Maybe it was the answer. He didn't want to believe that. Not completely. He still respected his uncle, still tried to believe in the Jedi. But the Jedi answered every question with distance, detachment, rejection. The whisper didn't. It listened. It didn't demand anything. Not faith, not obedience. It simply showed him another way. He had never told anyone about it. Not Luke, not Leia, certainly not Han. He didn't have the words, and even if he did, he knew what they'd say. They'd tell him it was wrong, that it was the dark side. But Ben didn't feel fear when it came. He felt peace. Not the peace of the Jedi, sterile, cold, still, but the peace of being understood, of not needing to hide, of not needing to pretend that he didn't feel what he felt. The whisper had no face. Not yet. But sometimes it took shape in his dreams. Not visions, those were Jedi tools, sharp and bright. This was something else. A figure. Tall, cold, still. Watching him. Always watching. It stood in places he didn't recognize. Thrones made of stone, rooms filled with smoke, stars that bled light in unnatural colors. And yet, somehow, all of it felt familiar. He never heard its name. But deep in his bones, he knew it was real. He began to sense it even when awake. The way light bent near certain artifacts. The chill behind the walls of the Jedi Temple, in chambers Luke never let him enter. The strange pull of certain holocrons locked away, sealed behind codes even Ben couldn't break. The Force was shifting. Not violently, subtly, and he was changing with it. Luke noticed. His lessons grew sharper, his instructions more cautious. He started watching Ben with quiet intensity, as if trying to see something before it happened. Ben saw it. He saw the doubt, the concern, the fear, and that fear pushed him further from the light. Because the people who claimed to trust him didn't. And the presence that shouldn't have did. There was a moment, brief, forgotten by most. A mission with his uncle to a world beyond the core. Uncharted, silent, a place lost in hyperspace echoes. They were searching for Jedi texts. Luke believed there were fragments buried in the ruins. But Ben felt something else. Not beneath, above, in the sky. Something ancient. And when he reached out, it reached back. The whisper didn't speak that day. It sang. A low, humming sound. Like glass vibrating under pressure, like stars dying just out of sight. He collapsed. Luke carried him back to the ship, said nothing. Asked nothing. But Ben knew. He had felt it too. Something was calling him. Something older than the Sith. Older than the Jedi. It had no temple. No code. Only will. And in that moment, Ben didn't feel afraid. He felt chosen. Not by blood. Not by legacy. But by something that had waited through centuries. Just for him. The presence that watched him did not rush. It did not push. It did not demand. It only waited. Patience like that does not come from mortals. Ben Solo felt it long before he understood it. A shadow behind his thoughts. A cold hand resting quietly on the edge of his mind. Never forcing its way in. Never breaking the barriers Luke taught him to build. It simply hovered, as if studying him, as if choosing him. The Jedi taught that the Force was balance, two halves moving as one, light and dark, order and temptation. But this presence didn't follow that pattern. It didn't feel like the Sith holocrons Luke kept sealed. It didn't feel like the Jedi scrolls either. It felt like something outside both. Something older. Something watching for the right moment to be known. Ben tried to ignore it, tried to drown it beneath meditation and discipline. But ignoring a voice does not silence it. It only makes it whisper from deeper places. And the deeper it whispered, the more he wondered who or what it truly was. Luke sensed the change, not the presence itself, but the fracture it left in Ben's focus, his frustration, his unanswered questions. Luke tried to reach him, tried to teach him, tried to guide him back to peace. But peace is not possible when a storm has chosen you. One night, during meditation, Ben reached farther into the Force than Luke allowed, beyond the temple, beyond the forests, beyond the safety of the light. And in the vast emptiness of the void, he felt it again. Not whispering, breathing. A presence far across the stars, in a place beyond maps and hyperspace routes. A place spoken of only in fragments. The unknown regions. When Ben extended his awareness, something extended back. A hand made of nothing but will. A mind colder than ice. A presence that seemed both alive and not alive. It didn't greet him. It recognized him. As if it had been waiting. Luke opened his eyes at that moment. His breath caught. Because he felt the tremor in the Force sharp and unnatural like a wound torn open. He called Ben's name. Ben didn't answer. He was frozen in place, hands trembling, breath unsteady, eyes locked on something only he could see. A shape, tall, wrapped in robes of shadow. No face, only darkness. It did not speak words, words were too small. It spoke intention. Find me. The Force snapped back like a recoiling blade. Ben gasped, collapsing to the floor. Luke rushed to him. But the damage wasn't physical. It was deeper. Ben tried to explain what he saw. But all that came out were fragments, a figure without form. A voice without sound. A presence that felt like destiny carved from darkness. Luke's expression changed. Not anger. Not disappointment. Fear. Real fear. He told Ben the vision was nothing. A trick of the mind. A test. A manifestation of inner conflict. But Ben heard the lie in his voice. And Luke knew he heard it. From that moment on, Ben felt more alone than ever. Because the only person who could help him wouldn't. And the only thing that understood him shouldn't. The presence returned in dreams, in reflections, in the silence before dawn. It showed him fragments of places he had never been. Towers of black stone, cathedrals made from obsidian, stars swirling around a hidden throne. And always the same figure standing at the center, waiting for him. Ben didn't know his name, but he knew his purpose. This presence was not a guide. It was a master, unseen, unspoken, but always there. And with every passing day, Ben's connection to it grew stronger while his connection to the Jedi grew weaker. Not because the darkness pulled harder, but because no one else ever reached out at all. Ben Solo didn't fall in a single moment. He drifted, a little more each day. It began with the way he spoke, quieter, less open. Then the way he walked, like the gravity around him had shifted, like something heavy moved with him now. Even his silence changed. It wasn't the quiet of peace, it was the quiet of isolation. The students noticed. So did Luke. But they mistook it for growing pains, for pressure, for the burden of his name. No one saw that the boy they knew was beginning to leave. Not because he wanted to, because he didn't know how to stay. Ben still trained, still meditated, still obeyed, but inside, he was already asking different questions. Not what kind of Jedi will I be, but why do I have to be one at all? The Force wasn't guiding him anymore. It was pulling him. And the pull did not come from the temple. It came from elsewhere. The presence he had seen in the void had not returned since that night, not in visions, not in dreams, but its absence was louder than its voice had ever been. It had awakened something in him. And now everything else felt hollow. The Jedi code, the lessons, even Luke's voice. None of it answered what he was becoming. Because what he was becoming had no place in the order. It wasn't darkness, not yet. But it wasn't light either. Ben started to believe that the Jedi weren't wrong because they failed, but because they denied failure existed. They pretended peace was the natural state of the galaxy, that all pain must be set aside, that all fear must be extinguished. But Ben's fear had a shape, a name, a history, and ignoring it didn't make it go away. It made it grow. There were days he would walk alone through the temple grounds and feel like the statues were staring at him, like the stone had judged him already. Like every Jedi who came before him had already decided what he could never be. And still, no one asked. No one asked why his eyes seemed distant, why his questions grew colder, why his hands sometimes trembled after training. They only said, "You'll be fine. You're strong. You're a Skywalker." But he wasn't. Not really. Anakin was a Skywalker. Luke was a Skywalker. Ben was something else. Half Solo, half Skywalker, all expectation. And the person he was supposed to be never existed. He stopped using his first name when introducing himself to new visitors. Just nodded, just bowed. He didn't want to hear it anymore. Ben had become a cage. And the only time he felt free was when he imagined becoming someone else. Someone without the burden, without the past, without the fear. He didn't know what that person looked like. But he had begun to feel him. In flashes, in instinct, in fire. Ben had not yet turned, but the mask was already forming. Not a physical one. Not yet. An idea, a shell, a version of himself strong enough to carry everything he couldn't. And inside that version, the boy would hide. Not to deceive others, but to protect himself. Because being Ben Solo meant being seen, and being seen meant being broken. So, he began to disappear. One choice at a time. One silence at a time. And by the time the voice returned, calling him once more across the Force, he was ready to answer. But it would not be Ben who spoke back. It would be the shadow of someone new. Someone who would never be broken again. It didn't happen during battle. There was no war outside, no blaring alarms, no clash of sabers. The Jedi Temple slept under starlight, quiet and untouched. But inside, something moved. A feeling, a shift in the Force. Ben Solo lay in his quarters, eyes open, heart still. The air around him felt heavier than usual, not hostile, not loud, just final. He had sensed it before. Moments like this, moments when the Force bent around him, when breath slowed, when sound faded. But this time, it was different. This time, It wasn't just the Force shifting. Something else had already made its choice. He felt his uncle's presence before the footsteps reached the door. Luke Skywalker, the Jedi Master, the legend, the last hope of the galaxy, and the man who had once looked at Ben with pride. Now, that pride was gone. Ben didn't move, he didn't speak. He just waited, not with fear, but with certainty, because something inside him already knew what was about to happen. He saw it in Luke's eyes the moment the door opened. Not anger, not hate, just fear. Pure, heavy, inescapable fear. And in that moment, something broke. Because Ben wasn't looking at a teacher anymore. He was looking at someone who had already made a decision. Luke's lightsaber ignited, just for a second, just long enough to be seen. And then, silence. He hesitated. Too long. Because in that hesitation, Ben saw everything. Not what Luke wanted, but what he truly felt. The moment passed. Luke deactivated the saber. Realization crashed into him. Shame, horror, guilt. But it was already too late. Ben ignited his own blade. The roof exploded. The room vanished in fire and smoke. He didn't attack Luke. He didn't speak. He didn't scream. He ran. Because the one person who was supposed to believe in him had raised a weapon instead. And that meant the temple wasn't home. It was a cage. Ben fled into the dark, through the burning rubble, past the stunned eyes of students who once called him brother. He didn't look back. Not because he didn't care. Because he couldn't. The Force was screaming now. Not whispering, not humming. Screaming, like the galaxy had been cracked open. He had been watched his whole life, judged, measured, controlled. And now, the people who once claimed to understand him were turning on him. He didn't know what Luke saw in that moment. A shadow, a monster, a future he feared too much to face. Ben didn't ask, because the truth didn't matter. The lightsaber had already been drawn. The moment had already happened, and it could never be undone. He ran through the forest, through firelit branches, through memories he no longer trusted. The temple burned behind him. He had not set it ablaze. Not yet. But others would. Because when power explodes, the galaxy responds. Ben didn't think about destiny. He didn't think about the Sith. He didn't even think about the voice. He thought about the boy who once wanted peace, who once asked too many questions, who once dreamed of being something more than blood. That boy was gone. And in his place, something else was waking up. Not in hate, not in revenge, but in survival. Because when the person who raised you to be strong sees you as a threat, you don't become strong. You become alone. And alone, you burn. Luke Skywalker had faced emperors, warlords, and the dark side itself. But none of it had prepared him for the moment he saw the future of his own nephew. He had come to Ben's room quietly, guided by a disturbance so sharp it felt like a wound in the Force. He expected fear, confusion, maybe a vision to interpret. But what he saw was something else. A storm. Not imminent. Already forming. He reached into Ben's mind, hoping to ease the pain, to understand. But the Force opened faster than he expected, deeper than he intended. And in a flash, 1,000 futures struck him at once. Burning temples, fallen students, a galaxy drowned in shadow. A boy, he raised standing beside darkness, older than Jedi memory. For a heartbeat, Luke saw Kylo Ren, Not the mask. Not the saber. The destiny. And in that single, terrible moment, he failed. He reacted with fear. Fear, in a Jedi Master, is a choice with consequences. Luke's blade ignited by instinct, not intention. A flash of light, a moment of weakness, a thought he never truly accepted. What if the child I trained brings ruin? But the moment he acted on it, he understood the cost. He saw the terrified eyes of the boy he loved. He saw Ben's disbelief. He saw his own failure reflected back at him. The saber vanished as quickly as it appeared. Luke tried to explain, to apologize, to undo what had already become truth. But Ben didn't hear words. He heard betrayal. And betrayal is louder than fear. Outside, thunder shook the sky, as if the Force itself reacted to the fracture between master and apprentice. Ben stumbled into the night, breath shaking, thoughts drowning in a storm he could no longer contain. Behind him, Luke whispered his name not as a master, but as a man begging for forgiveness. Ben didn't stop, because forgiveness is a language learned through trust. And trust had died the moment the saber rose. Luke stood alone in the doorway, staring at the ruin his fear created. Jedi do not cling to attachment, but Luke did. He loved Ben. He loved him as family, as hope, as the future the Order needed. And that love betrayed him. Because love without clarity becomes fear in disguise. The Force trembled. The air pressed inward. Luke sank to his knees on the cold stone floor, realizing the truth he had never wanted to face. The Jedi Order had failed again. Not because Ben was dangerous, but because Luke believed he might be. And belief has power. In the forest, Ben felt the world shifting. Trees bent, wind cracked, the ground pulsed beneath his feet. His heartbeat echoed like thunder in his chest. The voice he had ignored returned not in whispers, but in certainty. Now you see it. They will never trust you. Come to me. He didn't answer. Not yet. He only searched for somewhere, anywhere that felt safe. But safety had existed only in the illusion of home. Now, home was a burning room behind him and a broken bond he could never repair. Luke rose slowly from the floor, his mind breaking under the weight of guilt. He reached for Ben through the Force, desperately trying to find him, to calm him, to pull him back. But the connection was different now. Ben did not feel like a student. He felt like a fracture. Like something slipping out of reach, carried by a tide Luke had no power to stop. Luke whispered into the night, voice trembling. Ben, please. But the boy who once trusted him had already made his choice. Not a path, a direction. Away. Away from the man who feared him. Away from the place that had failed him. Away from the name he could no longer bear. And with each step he took, the distance between them grew not across the forest floor, but across destiny. The temple did not burn because of anger. It burned because of fear. When Ben ran into the forest, he wasn't thinking of destruction. He wasn't thinking of revenge. He wasn't thinking of the dark side or destiny or the whisper that had followed him all his life. He was thinking of one thing: survival. His chest felt tight, his breath cut in half. His mind flooded with the image of his uncle, the man who raised him, guided him, believed in him, standing over him with a lit lightsaber. It didn't matter that Luke regretted it the second his blade ignited. It didn't matter that he never meant to strike. The moment had already happened, and moments like that change people. Ben stumbled deeper into the trees, the night shaking around him. Every branch felt like a judgment. Every gust of wind felt like a warning. He kept moving, because stopping meant facing the truth he wasn't ready to accept. Behind him, the Force pulsed like a heartbeat. Something was coming. Not Luke. Not the students. Something older. Something Ben had felt his whole life without understanding. The presence. It had waited for him in silence. Now it moved toward him with purpose. Ben felt it like cold fingers across his spine. A calling, a claim, a voice without sound pulling him forward. He didn't follow it. He didn't reject it. He simply moved where survival pushed him. And then, the sky lit up. Fire. Bright, sudden, consuming. The temple he had slept in, trained in, tried to belong in erupted into flames. Not from within. From above. A storm in the Force. A violent surge of energy. A reaction to a bond torn apart. The ground shook. Trees buckled. The air howled. Ben fell to his knees, the heat brushing his face even from the forest's edge. He stared at the flames rising into the night, swallowing the only home he had ever known. He hadn't ignited it, but he knew the galaxy would say he did. Because stories don't care about truth. They care about the pieces that fit. The students rushed out of the burning halls, their shouts drowned by collapsing stone. Panic, confusion, betrayal. Some called for Luke, others called for help. A few saw Ben in the distance, a silhouette against the fire. And in that instant, their fear turned into certainty. They thought he had done it. Ben saw their faces twisted in horror, disbelief, anger. He took a step toward them, desperate to explain, to speak, to do anything but stand there like a ghost. But the Force stopped him. It pushed him back, gently but firmly, like a hand across his chest. Not this path. Not anymore. The presence wrapped around him like a cloak, not warm, not comforting, but familiar. A shadow that had always been there, waiting for him to reach the point where there was nowhere else to go. Luke emerged from the flames, coughing, bleeding, eyes shaking with grief. He looked at the burning temple, the fallen students, the ruin of everything he built. And then he looked at Ben. Their eyes met across the field of fire. Luke saw devastation. Ben saw the end of trust. There were no words between them. No apologies, no explanations. Only the truth they both felt. Something had ended. Something the Force itself could not mend. Ben turned away. Because there was nothing left to stay for. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He didn't strike back. He simply walked into the darkness not as a villain, not as a monster, but as a boy who had lost everything in a single night. The flames rose behind him. The presence grew stronger. And the path ahead, the one he never wanted, began to unfold beneath his feet. The temple was gone. Smoke curled upward like memories unspoken. Stones cracked under the weight of silence. Embers drifted through the air, too small to burn, too stubborn to die. Luke Skywalker stood in the ruins, surrounded by everything he tried to rebuild and everything he failed to protect. Ben Solo was no longer there. Not in the fire. Not in the Force. Something had changed in him, and in the galaxy. Luke walked through the wreckage, footsteps careful, heart heavy. He saw lightsabers broken in half, robes singed and scattered, the pillars of the Order scorched down to the roots. But the worst wound was not in stone. It was in the bond. The trust between master and student had shattered. And in its place, something unspoken had formed. Not hate, not yet, but distance so deep the Force itself could not reach across it. Ben hadn't destroyed the temple, not with intention, not with rage, but destruction had followed him anyway, like a shadow obeying grief, like a future obeying fear. Luke knelt beside the remains of the archive chamber. The ancient texts were ash, the knowledge of centuries lost in one night. He did not cry. Jedi are taught to accept loss. But this wasn't loss. This was failure. He had seen the darkness rising in Ben not because Ben showed it, but because the Force showed him, and he responded with fear. And fear is the seed of ruin. Far beyond the smoldering walls, Ben walked alone across a barren ridge. No food, no shelter, no map, only silence. And silence, when filled with betrayal, becomes something else. It becomes the place where new names are born. He didn't speak, not to the Force, not to himself. There was no one left to hear him. He had nothing. But the voice had returned. Not louder, clearer. It didn't speak like a teacher. It spoke like an old friend, one who had always known this moment would come. It didn't offer promises of power. It offered truth. They turned on you. You survived. Now choose what comes next. Ben didn't choose Kylo Ren that night. Not yet. He didn't wear armor, didn't wield a crossguard, didn't kneel before any master. He just kept walking. Through the dark, through the cold, through the memories of faces that would never look at him the same. He thought of the students who feared him, of his mother, far away, feeling a tremor she couldn't explain, of his father, who never understood the Force but would soon understand what it had taken from him. And he thought of Luke, not the Jedi legend, but the man who had looked at him with doubt in his eyes and a saber in his hand. Ben had dreamed of being more than a legacy, more than a name. But now, all that remained was the part of him no one understood. The part that whispered in the quiet. The part that survived. He slept beneath the stars that night. No fire to warm him. No companions to protect him. The Force swirled around him, untamed. And for the first time, it didn't hurt. It accepted him. Not because he was strong. Because he was alone. In the temple ruins, Luke stared into the ash. He could still feel Ben. Not close. Not lost. Just gone. He didn't tell Leia. Not yet. Because he didn't know how to say that hope had burned under his own hand. The Jedi Order was ashes. Its future, walking away. And somewhere deep in the unknown regions, something smiled. Because the boy was finally broken. And broken things are easier to shape. Ben Solo did not die in the flames of the temple. But something inside him did. There was no funeral, no body to honor, no words spoken in his memory, only silence, the kind that settles after betrayal, the kind that follows a wound too deep to name. He walked for days, through forests that knew his footsteps, through valleys where the Force trembled around him. He did not look back, because everything behind him had already chosen to let him go. The voice followed him. Still patient, still waiting, still certain. Not the whisper he grew up with, not the faint tug in the back of his mind. This was stronger, closer, as if distance meant nothing and destiny had finally stepped forward. Ben stopped being Ben long before he reached the edge of known space. What remained was a shell, a shape. A boy carrying a weight too heavy for his name. And names matter. Names carve identity. Names shape destiny. Names bury what must not return. In the cold stretches of the galaxy, where maps ended and myths began, Ben found a ship crewed by wanderers, warriors, dressed in scrap metal and bone, their weapons humming with violence and ritual. The Knights of Ren. They did not ask who he was. They asked what he could do. And in the look on their leader's face, Ren himself, Ben saw the first truth he had been given since the night Luke raised a blade against him. He was not broken. He was useful. Ren sensed the power swirling around him, raw and wild. He didn't treat it with caution or fear. He welcomed it, he welcomed him. A place among them was not granted, it was taken. Ren ordered him to prove himself, to bleed, to strike, to show the darkness he kept caged. Ben did not want to fight. But the moment the leader pressed his blade to Ben's throat, something inside him snapped. Not rage, not hatred. Instinct. The same instinct that kept him alive when the temple fell. The same instinct that kept him alive when the man he trusted most faltered. He moved with precision he didn't know he had. A single strike, fast, final. Ren fell in silence, eyes wide, understanding too late the power he had invited aboard his ship. The knights watched. Not with fear, with acceptance. Because this was their way. Power leads. Weakness follows. The dead make room for the strong. One of them spoke the word first. Ren. Not the man he killed. The mantle. A title carried through violence, through dominance, through shadow. Ben did not correct them. He did not say he had another name. He did not say he had once been something else. Ben Solo was a wound. Kylo Ren was armor. He stepped into the role not as a choice, but as a refuge. A shield made of pain and fire, and silence. A name sharp enough to hide behind. The knights bowed their heads not out of loyalty, but recognition. They did not follow morals. They followed strength. And the boy who had once tried to be gentle, now held enough power to lead killers. Kylo Ren. A name that carried darkness. A name that severed the past. A name that buried Ben Solo without a grave. He felt something shift in him, like a door closing forever. The Force trembled around him, bending toward the identity he had finally accepted. Not Jedi. Not student. Not son. Something new. Something forged in betrayal and flame. Kylo Ren lifted his hood for the first time, letting the fabric fall like a curtain between who he had been and who he was becoming. And far across the galaxy, the presence that watched him welcomed the transformation. Because now, finally, the boy had taken his first step toward the master he did not yet know. The Knights of Ren did not speak often. They lived in silence, moved in violence, and served only power. They were not Sith. They had no code, no temple, no purpose beyond the will of the strong. Their order came from instinct, from hunger, from ritual sharpened over centuries of exile. They followed Ren, not the man, but the mask, the name, the idea that strength is its own law. And now, they followed Kylo. He didn't lead them with words. He didn't have to. He led by surviving. By showing them that pain was not weakness, it was direction. That anger could be shaped into silence. That the Force could belong to those who refused to beg for it. He became one of them, but not like them. They had given themselves to the dark out of desperation. He had walked into it with open eyes. They taught him how to kill without hesitation, how to burn settlements that harbored enemies, how to speak in the old language of fire and submission. He did not flinch, he did not question, because questions belonged to Ben, and Ben was gone. They roamed the edge of the galaxy, outer rim worlds, unknown region outposts, places where the Republic had no reach. The knights hunted for objects, for relics, for rumors of power left behind by the dead Sith. They fought Force sensitives who refused to kneel. They left no survivors. They wore masks not to hide but to forget. Kylo never wore one. Not yet. Because forgetting was not enough. He wanted to erase. On one mission, they found a ruin beneath the surface of a desert moon. Stone carvings, half-buried statues. Something ancient slept there, not a person, not a spirit, just an echo of power. The others backed away. Kylo walked forward. The Force bent around him like a spiral, pulling him toward a broken altar marked with Sith runes. He placed his hand upon the stone, and it spoke, not aloud, but in memory, a vision, a flash. A man in a hood standing on a throne of ash, a fleet of silence behind him, a voice like cold iron, not promising peace, but structure. Kylo opened his eyes. The vision was gone, but the message was not. He said nothing to the knights. They never asked, because the deeper he fell into the shadow, the less they saw him as one of them. He was no longer a leader by ritual. He was something else. Set apart. Set above. They followed him not because they trusted him, but because they feared what he might become. He fought without restraint, spoke only when necessary, and when they returned to their ship after raids, Kylo sat alone at the far edge of the firelight, eyes closed, listening. Not to the wind, not to the forest, but to the Force. It was different now. Sharper, colder, more precise. He could feel someone watching again. Not the knights. Something older. Still patient. Still waiting. The voice had become a direction. And Kylo knew it would soon become a face. But for now, he followed its pull through the stars. Through fire. Through silence. And with every planet burned, every life ended, every ruin uncovered, Ben Solo's memory faded a little more. He was becoming a myth in reverse. Not a legend who saved the galaxy, but a wound the galaxy refused to see. He wore no crown. He claimed no title. Only a name. A name built not to be remembered but to make forgetting easier. Kylo Ren. The one who could not feel pain, because the one who felt it had already been buried. It began as a hum behind his thoughts, a rhythm beneath the Force, a pressure just outside the edge of space, not loud, not sharp, but constant. Kylo Ren felt it during sleep, during silence, during moments when the galaxy forgot to move, a pulse, slow and cold, as if something buried had started to breathe again. He thought it was memory. It wasn't. It was a summons. The Knights of Ren did not sense it. They had power, but not depth. They followed the Force like predators chasing its scent, feeding on its echoes. But Kylo was different. He did not chase the Force. The Force chased him. And now, something within it had begun to awaken. One mission took them to the edge of the unknown regions. A forgotten system, no name, no record. The planet was barren, black as obsidian, silent beneath storms. There were no signs of life, no energy signatures, but Kylo felt it before they landed. A pull, like gravity without mass. He left the ship alone. The others didn't ask why. He walked for hours across a dead plain, through mist that clung to the skin like memory. The wind spoke in broken syllables. Not words, not language, just intention. You were meant to come. He reached a structure sunken, silent, sharp, against the sky like a tooth driven into the flesh of the world. A spire made of stone older than Republic history. No door, no markings. He touched the wall. The Force opened. Not with light, with shadow. He stepped inside, and the galaxy fell away. Darkness swallowed sound. Space folded in upon itself. And at the center of the void, he saw it. A throne. Not empty. Occupied. The figure did not move, did not speak. Yet Kylo knew the name before it was ever said. Snoke. But the name meant nothing. Because what sat there was not a man. It was a wound-given voice. It smiled not with joy, not with cruelty, but with knowledge, the kind that sees all things, because it has watched from behind every curtain. Kylo said nothing. He didn't bow. He didn't flinch. He listened. Snoke did not call him Ben. He did not call him Kylo. He didn't use a name at all. Because he already knew what Kylo had become. He spoke of power, of legacy, of balance lost and reclaimed. He spoke of the Jedi's blindness, of Luke's failure, of Anakin's weakness. And then he spoke of the voice. The one Kylo had heard for years. It was me. Not a whisper in the dark. Not a presence beneath the skin. A design. Kylo didn't react. Because he had already guessed. Snoke called the Jedi false. The Sith, broken. He spoke of a new order not ruled by code or tradition, but by clarity. And Kylo listened. Not because he believed him, but because the Force was quiet, and in the quiet he felt purpose. Snoke reached out, not with commands, but with understanding. He offered no absolution, no comfort, no promise of healing. He offered structure, a path, a war that needed to be won. Not for glory, for control. Because power without order meant nothing. And Kylo had seen what happened when people called him dangerous, then failed to guide him. He didn't kneel. Not that day. But something in him lowered its head. Not in surrender. In recognition. Because this was not a beginning. This was what had always been waiting. The Master. Not of the Jedi. Not of the Sith. But of him. And in the quiet beyond stars, a war began not with armies, but with a boy who no longer needed to ask why. He wore the black robes without ceremony. Not because they gave him strength, but because they took away identity. The man beneath them no longer needed to be known. He only needed to be followed. The Knights of Ren accepted the change. So did the growing fragments of the First Order warships in production, fleets reorganizing in shadow, officers loyal to the new command. The Republic did not see it yet. The resistance was still a whisper. But Kylo Ren had already become real. He was no longer a myth waiting to rise. He was a figure made of silence and certainty. And for the first time in his life, he had purpose. It came from Snoke, it came from structure. It came from the voice that no longer whispered but commanded. Snoke molded him like stone, not with affection, with intent. He praised Kylo's strength, his bloodline, his potential, but always reminded him he had not earned anything yet. Power must be proven, pain must be embraced, the Jedi must be erased. And Kylo believed it. Not because he wanted to destroy, but because he had already been destroyed. He began wearing the mask shortly after, not to frighten others but to silence what was left of himself. Ben Solo had been too fragile, too hopeful, too visible. Kylo Ren would not make that mistake. The mask covered everything. The voice, the eyes, the doubt. Snoke told him it was strength, a symbol of fear, a legacy reborn in metal and silence. But Kylo wore it for a different reason. To disappear. Because every time he looked in the mirror, he still saw the boy. The one who hesitated. The one who trusted. The one who was betrayed. He hated that boy. Because the boy had wanted to be loved. Kylo Ren wanted something else. Control. Of himself. Of the Force. Of the past. He hunted the remaining Jedi relics. Burned shrines once sacred. Buried names once whispered in reverence. He carved a path through the stars, not for glory, but for absence. The more he destroyed, the less he had to feel. But nothing ever stayed gone. The ache returned when he was alone. In silence. Between orders. Behind the mask. He would hear a name not spoken aloud, just inside him. Ben. And for a moment, the pain would surface. But Kylo had learned how to bury it. He would strike something. Kill something. Break something. And the ache would retreat. Snoke saw the cracks. He pressed harder. Demanded more. Kill the past. Kill the Jedi. Kill what makes you weak. And Kylo tried. He obeyed. He bled. He rose through the ranks of the First Order, until even generals lowered their eyes. His commands were carried without question. His presence silenced rooms. But power did not heal. And in quiet moments, when his breath echoed beneath the mask, he wondered, if I've killed everything that made me weak, why do I still feel hollow? He never asked the question aloud. Because questions belonged to the boy. And the boy was gone. Or so, he told himself. The First Order grew. The resistance began to stir. War crept closer. And Kylo stood at the center of it, robed, masked, named, and followed. But even shadows have memory. And deep beneath the armor, beneath the name, beneath the voice Snoke had shaped, the child still whispered. Not loud, not often, but enough to remind him of what had been lost. And what still remained, beneath everything. The mask was not for them. It was for him. Forged of obsidian alloy, and shaped in mimicry of ancient Sith artifacts, Kylo Ren's helmet was meant to instill fear. In resistance pilots, in spies, in officers, in traitors, but none of them mattered. The mask existed to silence the past. Its breath distorted his voice. Its shadow hid his eyes. Its weight reminded him every time he put it on that Ben Solo no longer existed. And if he no longer existed, then the pain couldn't reach him. That was the hope. It didn't work. Kylo wore the mask the way the wounded wear bandages, not to heal, but to hold the pieces together. Because inside the armor, the fracture remained. He did not tremble in battle. He did not hesitate in command. But alone in chambers lit by dying embers, in silence between orders, the ache returned. It wasn't guilt. It was memory. The kind that stayed behind even after you buried the name that caused it. Snoke praised the mask. He said it gave Kylo form, power, mystery. A weapon is more than its blade, he said. It's the legend around it. And masks build legend. But Kylo didn't wear it for legend. He wore it for survival. Because every time he removed it, he saw himself. And what he saw was not finished. The scar across his face from a training session long before the temple fell. The eyes that still resembled his mother's. The mouth that spoke with his father's shape. And worse, the boy still underneath it all. The one who asked questions. The one who believed. The one who trusted Luke Skywalker. So he kept it on. Even when it pressed too hard. Even when the breath grew shallow. Because inside the mask, he could vanish. He could become a voice, a force, a figure shaped by war and flame and control. He could become Kylo Ren. And that had to be enough. But the Force does not forget. It moves around masks. Through them, it sees past armor, past legend, past the walls built in fear. And sometimes, when Kylo closed his eyes, he didn't feel like a weapon. He felt like a child wearing his father's jacket. Too big, too heavy. Pretending it fit. He never admitted it. Not to Snoke, not to Hux, not to the Knights of Ren. Because weakness was death, and doubt was worse. But the truth sat with him in the silence. He wasn't finished. He wasn't whole. He was running from something that lived in his own name. And the mask, heavy, cold, unyielding, made it easier to pretend the running had ended. When he spoke through it, his voice was deeper. Not just in sound, in tone, in distance. Ben Solo's voice had cracked when he was afraid. Kylo Ren's voice made others afraid. It was safer that way. He trained harder than ever, fought longer, meditated with fists clenched. He studied ancient Sith writings, not for belief but for control. The Jedi taught surrender. The Sith taught domination. Kylo studied both, accepted neither, because neither had saved him. Snoke noticed the cracks. He always did, but he let them stay. Cracks, after all, are useful. They give masters something to grip. And Kylo Ren, no matter how sharp, how cloaked, how feared, was still not free. He was shaped, guided, hidden. The galaxy saw a masked figure who spoke of order and strength. But beneath the metal, behind the breath, there was still a boy. Not dead, not gone, just waiting. For the moment the mask no longer worked. And the ache returned, louder than before. Snoke did not teach through kindness. He taught through pressure. Every lesson began the same way, with silence. A silence so deep it felt like it swallowed sound, swallowed thought, swallowed breath. Kylo Ren would stand before him, mask on, spine straight, hands still, and Snoke would watch. Not study, watch. As if observing a storm he had summoned. He spoke rarely at first, only when the silence revealed what words could not. When Kylo shifted the weight on his feet. When his thoughts flickered toward memory. When the mask became a shield instead of a tool. It was in these moments Snoke pressed the deepest. Remove it. Kylo never hesitated. He lifted the helmet slowly, as if pulling away the only thing that held him together. The room felt colder without it, more exposed, more dangerous. Snoke never looked at the mask. He looked at the face beneath it, at the scar, at the eyes, at the boy. There, Snoke would whisper, "I see him." Kylo hated those words, because they were true. Snoke trained him not to destroy the past, but to fear its return. Every mistake was tied to Ben Solo. Every hesitation was blamed on the boy still inside him. Every fracture became proof that the mask was not enough. He pressed on Kylo's failures. He stretched his pain. He magnified every doubt. Not to break him, to shape him. Snoke never wanted a successor. He wanted a weapon sharpened by regret. He showed Kylo fragments of his destiny, not visions, but manipulations. Scenes of Luke's collapse, scenes of the Jedi dead, scenes of Ben's weakness crushing the galaxy. All of it curated to twist the boy's heart, just enough to make him desperate for purpose. "You were not chosen," Snoke would say. "You were needed." Kylo listened, because no one had ever told him that before. Needed, not loved, not wanted. Needed. The word wrapped around his chest like cold armor. It gave weight to his steps. It gave direction to his pain. It made his scars feel earned, not suffered. Snoke taught him how to feed on conflict. Not rage. Conflict. The space between who he was and who he pretended to be. The tension that lived beneath the mask. The ache that came from remembering the boy he once was, and the hatred that came from wishing he wasn't. "Use the pull to the light," Snoke instructed. "Twist it. Confuse it. Make it serve you." Kylo tried, but the light didn't twist. It resisted. It reminded him of the smell of his mother's hair when she hugged him, the sound of his father laughing at his own jokes. The rare nights Luke told stories of the old Jedi, smiling without worry. Snoke saw every flicker of warmth like a crack in a blade. He attacked it ruthlessly. He mocked Han Solo's failures. He questioned Leia's strength. He dismissed Luke Skywalker as a frightened old relic. And every insult became a wound. Kylo defended nothing, because defending anything meant remembering he cared. And caring was the one weakness he could not afford. Snoke's throne room became a place of unmaking. Each session stripped away another layer of Ben Solo's memory. Snoke pushed him to swing harder, to strike faster, to sever every tie left in his heart. But each command left an emptiness behind. A hollow place even Snoke could not fill. Kylo learned obedience. He learned power. He learned control. What he never learned, what Snoke never allowed, was peace. Because peace would have given Ben room to return. And Snoke needed Kylo Ren. Not whole. Not healed. Fractured. A weapon held together by darkness and shaped by the fear of becoming himself again. The First Order did not rise overnight. It rose in silence. In deep space shipyards untouched by New Republic eyes. In meetings held aboard star destroyers that never bore Imperial colors. In promises made not for peace but for control. And at the center of it all stood Kylo Ren. He did not sit on a throne. That belonged to Snoke. He stood in shadow behind the Supreme Leader's chair, wrapped in black, face hidden, voice distorted. To the officers he was myth. To the soldiers he was a warning. But Kylo did not need their fear. He needed distance. From himself. From memory. From the truth buried beneath the mask he refused to take off unless ordered. The throne room was cold, wide, empty of comfort. Snoke ruled from it like a god sculpting his creation in front of the stars. The galaxy thought the Sith were gone, and they were by name. But darkness does not need old names to return. It only needs the will to shape pain into purpose. Kylo stood in that throne room for hours some days, not speaking, not moving, just watching Snoke dispense commands with a voice made of venom and velvet. His words controlled fleets, rearranged star systems, Snoke could raise a planet in one sentence, destroy another in a breath. And Kylo listened, because this was power, not freedom, structure. He watched the generals, proud in uniform but afraid of questions. He watched Hux, eyes burning with ambition and disdain, a man who thought Kylo's power came from costumes and ceremony. He watched soldiers fall into line, citizens fall into silence, and planets fall into shadows. And all the while, Kylo said nothing, because the more the galaxy feared him, the less it might remember who he used to be. Snoke assigned him to Starkiller Base, not just to oversee the weapon, but to become part of it. Your rage, Snoke said, will be the spark that silences the stars. Kylo felt no pride, only duty. The base was carved into the heart of a frozen world, an ancient husk-turned superweapon, a machine built not just to kill planets, but to erase them from memory. And Kylo walked its halls like a ghost. He did not laugh. He did not rest. He trained until the walls trembled, meditated until his breath slowed to nothing. And still, the ache remained. He felt it most in the quiet between meetings, in the hum of the reactor below, in the glint of light on the obsidian floors, a shape half forgotten, the shape of a boy who once asked for help. Sometimes he touched the mask without meaning to, his fingers brushing the metal not in reverence but in doubt, as if testing whether it still worked, whether it still made him something else. Snoke noticed. He always noticed. So he gave Kylo a task. Seek the map, he said, find Skywalker. And suddenly, the past Kylo had buried was no longer behind him. It was his mission, his command, his inheritance. The First Order mobilized. Ships roared through hyperspace. Droids were deployed. Agents dispatched. And Kylo Ren stepped into the galaxy, not just as a warrior, but as a hunter, searching not just for Luke Skywalker, but for the final proof that Ben Solo was truly gone. Because, as long as Luke lived, the boy still existed, somewhere, and Kylo could feel it. A shadow inside the Force, waiting, not to fight him, to forgive him. And forgiveness was the one thing Kylo Ren could never survive. He stood above the ashes of the village, lightsaber still humming. The blade hissed in the cold, its crossguard burning like the memory of every name he had tried to erase. Soldiers moved behind him. The last screams had already faded. Smoke curled toward the stars. The snow beneath his feet was black with fire. This was what Snoke had asked of him. Power, precision, fear. He had given all of it. And still, the fracture remained. Kylo Ren watched the bodies without reaction. Without judgment, he told himself it was necessary. He told himself it was proof that Ben Solo was dead. But something inside him whispered otherwise. He had found the map or a piece of it. It had slipped through his fingers. A defecting stormtrooper, a droid on the run, a girl who looked at him with eyes that didn't flinch. Rey. He didn't know her name at first, just her presence in the Force. Bright, untrained, and terrifying. Not because of what she could do, because of what she reminded him of. Hope. Not the kind the Resistance fought for. Not political. Not strategic. Personal. The kind he had buried. She looked at him and didn't see the mask. She saw the fracture. He interrogated her, pressed into her thoughts, felt her push back. Stronger than she should have been. stronger than anyone without training should ever be. She saw things she shouldn't have. The scar, the memory, the pull. And for a moment, Kylo saw himself reflected in her eyes not as a monster, but as a warning. He told himself she was the threat. But the truth was simpler. She was the possibility. The proof that maybe he had chosen wrong. That maybe strength wasn't the absence of pain. Maybe it was surviving it. He didn't speak of it. Not to Snoke, not to the knights, not to himself. But when he returned to Starkiller Base, something inside him was shaking. Not enough to stop. Just enough to notice. The mask grew heavier. His voice cracked beneath its modulation. And when he removed it in silence, he stared into the metal like a mirror that never showed the same face twice. Ben. Kylo. Neither. Both. Snoke sensed the instability. He called it weakness. He pressed harder. She is nothing, he said, an orphan, a scavenger. You are heir to Vader. But Kylo had stopped feeling like an heir. He wasn't Vader. Vader had fallen in darkness and died in the light. Kylo had done the opposite. And the light still followed him. No matter how far he ran, no matter what he burned. The Force began to tremble when he meditated, not in rejection, in reflection, like it was holding up a memory he couldn't erase. He saw the boy again. Ben Solo. The child who wanted to be good. The apprentice who wanted to be trusted. The son who only wanted to be loved. Kylo buried him again. Harder this time. With more violence. More orders. More silence. But nothing stayed buried. Not truly. And when he looked into the stars, he didn't see the future he was promised. He saw fire. He saw choice. And he saw the moment coming closer with every breath when he would have to decide not what kind of warrior to become, but what kind of man to stop pretending he wasn't. Because even legends have limits. Even shadows have roots. And even a mask forged in pain can still crack from the inside. Starkiller Base was alive. Not with nature, not with warmth, but with something colder. A heartbeat of metal and ice. A weapon carved into a planet, waiting for a command that would rewrite the galaxy in seconds. Stormtroopers marched across the frozen plains. Officers barked orders. Engines hummed beneath the crust of the world. Kylo Ren walked through it all like a shadow. Purpose in every step. Silence in every movement. Conflict in every breath. He told himself there was no turning back, that the boy he used to be was buried under years of anger and obedience. But the Force never lied, and today it trembled. Because someone was here. Someone he had tried to forget. Someone he could never escape. His father, Han Solo. Kylo felt him long before he saw him, a familiar presence drifting through the cold wind of Starkiller Base. A voice he once chased as a child. A warmth that reached him even now, cutting through mask, armor, and silence. He tried to ignore it. He couldn't. The light inside him, the one he had tried to crush, to bury, to kill, stirred. Not in strength, in memory. Pieces of childhood he didn't want. Nights when Han carried him on his shoulders. Stories told in starship light. Moments that should have been small, but stayed large. Snoke sensed the shift. Your father weakens you, he said. He must die, you know this. Kylo didn't answer. Because knowing and wanting were not the same. The wind grew sharper as he walked toward the oscillator chamber. Soldiers hurried past him, unaware of the war raging in his chest. He kept his steps even, his breathing controlled, his mask steady. But the Force followed him. It tugged at him, pushed at him. Softly, painfully. Like it wanted him to stop. Like it wanted him to turn around. Kylo clenched his fist. He had come too far. He had surrendered too much. He had burned every bridge that once led him home. If he wavered now, if he hesitated, everything Snoke had built in him would crack. He walked out onto the surface. Snow fell around him, white flakes drifting toward the black fabric of his robes. The wind howled across the open catwalks, and beyond the glow of the oscillator, he felt it again. A presence. Steady, familiar, close. He looked across the bridge. There he stood, Han Solo, older, tired, but unchanged in the way that mattered, in the way that burned. Kylo froze. Not in fear, in recognition. Han wasn't holding a blaster, wasn't shouting, wasn't angry. He was only looking at him. As a father, as if the man before him wasn't a masked warrior of the First Order. As if he was still the boy he named. The snow continued to fall. Time slowed. Kylo told himself he was ready, that this moment was his test, that killing Han Solo would finally sever the last tie, end the last whisper of Ben Solo, and grant him the darkness he deserved. But the Force around him was not dark. It was grieving. The closer Han stepped, the louder Kylo's heart beat. A rhythm of conflict, a warning, a memory, a plea. Kylo gripped his lightsaber. Han kept walking. The bridge stretched between them like fate, narrow, cold, suspended above an impossible distance. Kylo had faced Jedi, Sith, artifacts, visions twisted by Snoke. But nothing had ever terrified him more than this moment. Because this wasn't a battle. It was a summons. Not from Snoke, not from destiny, from the past, from the light, from the man who still believed the boy inside him wasn't dead. Kylo stood there as the snow fell, as the wind roared, as the bass trembled, and he realized the truth he had spent years trying to escape. This was the moment everything would break. No matter which choice he made. Han Solo had faced danger his entire life. Smugglers, huts, stormtroopers, war. But none of them frightened him the way this moment did. Because this was not a fight. This was his son. The snow swirled around him as he stepped onto the bridge, each footfall echoing in the cold metal beneath him. He didn't call out at first. He didn't shout Kylo's name. He didn't reach for his blaster. He simply looked at him. Not at the mask, not at the robes, at the shape of the boy he once carried across the holes of a starship, pretending not to care when the child clung too tightly to his jacket. Kylo did not move. He stood frozen at the far end of the bridge, black against white, breath heavy beneath the mask. His lightsaber hung at his side, unlit but ready, like a truth he wasn't yet willing to face. Han stepped closer. "Young man," he whispered. 2 words he had used for years. Kylo's breath caught. Not loud, barely a sound. Han kept walking, slowly, carefully, the way someone approaches an injured animal that might run or strike. He saw the tension in Kylo's shoulders, the trembling beneath the armor, the hesitation in every breath. He saw the boy. "Take off that mask," Han said quietly. "You don't need it." Kylo didn't obey immediately. But something inside him shifted. A fracture, a memory, A voice from years ago calling him kid, telling him stories of the Kessel Run, of luck, of mistakes turned into victories, of family, gathered around a small kitchen on a ship that should have fallen apart ages ago. He lifted his hands. Slowly, he removed the mask. And for the first time in years, Han saw his son's face. Tired, pale, marked by a scar he never should have earned. But still his son. Han stepped closer. Kylo didn't step back. The cold wind wrapped around them, but the air between them felt warmer than it had in years, painfully warm, because warmth meant connection, and connection meant danger. Kylo swallowed, eyes fixed on the man he had tried so hard to forget. "I'm being torn apart," he whispered. Han's heart cracked. He didn't show it, but he felt every syllable like a blade. "I want to be free of this pain." Han placed a hand on his cheek. A father's touch. A memory returning from the dead. "You can," Han said softly. "Come home." Home. A word so simple, so gentle, and yet Kylo felt it crush him. He wanted it. He always had. But Snoke's voice echoed behind the memory. "Your father is your weakness. You must kill him. Only then will you rise." Kylo's eyes filled with conflict. He wasn't looking at a general. He wasn't looking at an enemy. He was looking at the man who brought him toys from distant starports, who pretended not to worry when he scraped his hands, who tried in his imperfect way to love a child he didn't understand. Han stepped closer, nose almost touching his son's forehead. "It's not too late." Kylo felt something collapse inside him. Not the darkness. The boy. Ben Solo surfaced, trembling, frightened, desperate. He wanted to fall into his father's arms. He wanted to scream. He wanted to run. He wanted to stop fighting the storm that had haunted him for so long. But destiny waited with an open hand. Kylo gripped his lightsaber. Han didn't see a weapon. He saw a plea. A cry for help. He held the hilt with Kylo, supporting its weight the way he held his son's hand when teaching him to walk. Kylo shuddered. The Force trembled. Han whispered, "It's okay." But nothing was okay. Kylo felt the choice split him open. One path led to forgiveness. One path led to darkness. And neither path let him remain what he pretended to be. The wind howled. The bass groaned. And between father and son, the galaxy held its breath. The bridge shook beneath their feet, humming with the power of the weapon buried inside the planet. Red lights pulsed along the walls. Snow drifted through the open gaps in the metal, catching on Kylo's hair as he stood face to face with the only man who ever tried to call him home. Han's hands were steady. Kylo's were not. Both of them held the hilt of the saber, each for a different reason. Han held it to save his son. Kylo held it to decide what he was allowed to become. The wind howled through the rafters. Kylo's breath trembled. The Force pressed in around them, not choosing a side, not guiding a fate, only witnessing. Because this moment belonged to neither the light nor the dark. It belonged to the fracture between them. Ben Solo stood inside Kylo, like a shadow begging to be seen, a memory of childhood, a question whispered in fear, a boy who still believed his father would cross the stars for him. And Han had. Kylo knew that now. He could feel it. His father wasn't here for glory, or strategy, or war. He was here because he still loved the son who had vanished into the armor. Kylo's voice cracked. "I know what I have to do." Han took a breath. He didn't speak. He didn't plead. He simply waited the way a father waits for a child to take a first step, knowing they might fall. Kylo's fingers tightened around the hilt. But I don't know if I'm strong enough to do it. Han reached for his face again, thumb brushing the side of his cheek the way he had done when Ben was still small enough to lift. You are, Han whispered. He meant come home. Kylo heard finish this. The Force quivered. Lights flickered. Something inside Kylo collapsed, a dam breaking under years of pressure. It wasn't hatred that filled him. It was fear. Fear that he would disappoint Snoke. Fear that he would lose the path he had carved from years of pain. Fear that if he chose the light now, the darkness would take everything in revenge. He didn't choose to ignite the blade. He fell into it. A reflex. A surrender. A moment where desperation drowned thought. The red blade erupted through Han's chest. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Han's eyes widened not in anger, not in betrayal, but in sorrow. A sorrow deep enough to fill galaxies. His hand rose, trembling, not to strike Kylo, but to hold his son's face one last time. Kylo leaned into the touch. Just slightly, barely a motion. But it was enough to show the truth. He didn't want this. Not truly. Not ever. Han's knees buckled. Kylo held him up out of instinct, out of guilt, out of a love he had been taught to bury. For a moment, father and son stood locked together, not by hatred, but by grief. Han whispered something too soft to hear. Kylo felt it in the Force. A goodbye. A forgiveness he did not deserve. Then Han fell. His hand slipped from Kylo's cheek. His body dropped toward the endless shaft below, swallowed by the cold glow beneath the bridge. Kylo watched him fall. Not as a warrior. Not as a monster. As a child, watching the last piece of his past disappear. The bridge groaned. The lights dimmed. The galaxy exhaled. Kylo waited for strength, for power, for the darkness to surge through him and claim what he had been promised. Instead, he felt nothing. Only the cold. A cold deeper than the snow around him. A cold shaped like loneliness. A cold shaped like regret. He had taken a life to silence the light inside him. But the light did not die. It watched him. It mourned him. And it waited. The bridge felt empty after Han fell. The snow still drifted through the broken rafters. The cold still cut through the metal. But nothing moved the way it had before. The wind was quieter, the lights dimmer. Even the screams of battle in the distance sounded far away, as if the world itself had stepped back to mourn. Kylo Ren stood alone. He kept his saber ignited, its red glow flickering across his face. Not because he needed it, not because he wanted it, but because turning it off meant admitting what he had done. He waited for darkness to rise inside him. For the promise Snoke had given him that sacrifice would free him. That killing Han Solo would silence the pull to the light. That this moment would make him whole. But the Force inside him did not roar. It did not strengthen. It did not reward. It recoiled. Not from hatred, from sorrow. His breath hitched behind the mask he no longer wore. His chest tightened in a way that felt familiar, too familiar. It was the same ache he felt the night Luke ignited his saber. The same ache when the temple burned. The same ache when he stood in ruins with no one left to look at him like a son. He told himself the ache was weakness. But weakness does not stay. This stayed. It throbbed beneath the armor, pressed against his ribs, filled his lungs with a pulse he could not swallow. He wanted to strike something, the railing, the snow, the air itself, but his hands wouldn't move. They trembled. He lowered his saber. The blade hissed out. Silence followed. Not the calming kind, the crushing kind. In that silence, Kylo felt the Force shift. He expected it to turn cold, to retreat, to punish him for the blood on his hands. But instead, it leaned closer. Not to comfort, to witness. The Force was not judging him. It was grieving with him. He hated it. He didn't want grief. He wanted power. He wanted proof that he had chosen correctly. That the path he carved in pain would finally reward him for the pieces it took. Instead, he felt smaller. Not like a warrior. Like a child standing barefoot on a broken floor, lost between two doors, neither of them open. He stepped backward. His boots slipped slightly on the frost. His breath shook. The mask in his hand felt heavier than ever. He remembered Han's voice. Not the words, the tone. Soft, warm, fragile in a way heroes were never meant to be. It's okay. It wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. Kylo wanted to scream. Wanted to tear the snow from the sky. Wanted to burn the bridge down and bury the memory. But the Force would not let him forget. It held the moment in place not as punishment, but as truth. The kind of truth that reshapes destiny. The kind that does not fade, no matter how deep it's buried. He walked away from the bridge, steps uneven. Stormtroopers rushed past him. Officers shouted orders. The base shook with explosions as the resistance attacked. But no one saw him. Not really. To them, he was Kylo Ren, commander, warrior, heir to Vader. To the Force, he was Ben Solo, a boy trying to kill a heart that refused to die. He stumbled down a corridor, each breath heavier than the last. His vision blurred at the edges, but he kept walking. He had to. Stopping meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering. Remembering meant feeling. And feeling was the one thing he could not survive right now. Snoke's voice echoed across the comm. You have done well. Kylo closed his eyes. No, he hadn't. He knew it. Snoke didn't care. And that hurt more than the blade he had driven into his father. Because Kylo had killed Han Solo to become stronger. But the moment Han fell, Kylo realized the truth. He had never hated his father. He had hated himself. And killing Han did not end that hatred. It deepened it. The snowstorm outside raged on, but inside the base, Kylo Ren walked through a storm far colder, the storm of a heart that refused to die no matter how many times he tried to bury it. The throne room glowed red with silence. Not the silence of peace. The silence after death. Kylo Ren stood among the bodies of the Praetorian Guard, breathing heavily, saber still warm in his hand. Across from him, Rey's chest rose and fell in uneven gasps, eyes locked on the severed halves of Supreme Leader Snoke. The man who claimed to be their master. Now a memory, split down the middle. Kylo hadn't planned it. He hadn't waited for the perfect moment. There was no strategy, no Sith ritual, no ancient prophecy fulfilled. He simply acted. Because in that moment, when Snoke mocked him, controlled him, used him like a weapon without will, Kylo saw the truth. He would never be free if he kept kneeling. And so he struck. Not for darkness, not for destiny. For himself. The Force had moved with him, fluid, quiet, precise. The blade turned without hesitation. Snoke's eyes had widened not in fear, but disbelief. Because he hadn't seen it coming. He had shaped Kylo Ren into a vessel, and he died believing he still controlled what was inside it. But Snoke never saw the fracture. The one that split Kylo from within. The one that made every command feel like a chain. The one that whispered, over and over, "This is not who you are." Rey had felt it too. In the elevator. In the throne room. In the moment they stood side by side, sabers drawn against a tide of crimson. She thought it meant change. She thought he was choosing the light. But Kylo wasn't choosing sides. He was choosing silence. Not peace. Just a moment without orders. Without masks. Without anyone else's voice inside his head. The throne still stood behind them, massive, dark, cold. Snoke had ruled from that seat like a god behind glass, every word calculated, every movement watched. And now, the throne stood empty, waiting for someone to claim it. Rey turned to Kylo. There was hope in her voice. Not naive. Genuine. "We can end this, right here. Join me." He looked at her, really looked, saw her not as an enemy, not as a rival, but as someone who had seen his pain and not turned away. He wanted to say yes. Not because he believed in her vision. Because he was tired. Tired of war. Tired of being shaped. Tired of the boy inside him, screaming beneath the armor. But he didn't speak. He looked past her. At the throne. And the silence inside him began to fill with something else. The force surged, not light, not dark, something raw. Power. Possibility. He stepped forward, slowly, eyes still on the throne. The red lights glinted against his armor. The ash from burned tapestries fell like snow. Rey waited for his words. Instead, he reached out. Not to her. To the galaxy. It's time to let old things die. The Jedi. The Sith. The Resistance. The First Order. All of it. She didn't understand. He wasn't talking about systems. He was talking about himself. He thought killing Snoke would give him clarity. It didn't. It gave him emptiness. And in that emptiness, he thought maybe if he ruled, it would finally stop. The ache. The noise. The boy. But thrones are just chairs. And power is just another kind of prison. He didn't kill Snoke to become something greater. He killed him to stop being told who he was. But now, with the throne standing still, and Rey watching him with hope turning to sorrow, Kylo realized something terrible. Snoke had died. But the chains were still there, because the voice that always controlled him was still his own. Her hand didn't shake when she offered it. That was what struck him most. Not the words, not the plea, not even the hope in her voice. It was the calm. Rey stood across from him, eyes steady, palm open, like a bridge stretched across time. "Ben," she said. "Not Kylo. Not Ren. Not monster. Ben." The name hit harder than the blade he had driven through his father. Because she didn't say it like a question. She said it like a memory that never stopped believing it could be real again. And for a heartbeat, he believed it too. The throne room around them was wreckage, guards dead, fire smoldering in the corners, Snoke's body cooling in the silence. Nothing left but ruin and choice. And still, she offered him a way out. He stared at her hand, at the small calluses across her fingers, the burn mark on her wrist, the dirt smudged across her palm from the last fight they'd survived together. She looked like someone who had known pain, but refused to become it. And for a moment, Kylo wanted to do the same. He stepped forward, not to rule, not to strike, to listen. Rey's eyes softened. The force between them pulsed not with power, but with possibility, the kind that doesn't come from prophecy, but from a choice no one else can make. She didn't see the throne behind him. She saw the boy beneath the mask, the child left behind on a burning night, the son who never stopped aching for something he couldn't name, the man who stood with a saber in one hand and a storm in the other, waiting for someone to see the difference. Rey saw it, and she reached out. "You're not alone." 3 words, soft, direct, final, and they broke something in him. He looked at her hand again, and he saw everything he wanted. Not power, not fear, not legacy. Peace, the kind that doesn't need masks. The kind that doesn't demand thrones. The kind that simply lets you stop running. But the silence didn't last. Because the throne behind him still whispered, not with Snoke's voice, with his own. What will you be without power? What will you be if you go back? What will they do when they see who you really are? Kylo's hand twitched. He wanted to take hers, more than anything, but he didn't. Because the moment he looked past her, he saw war. The Resistance would never trust him. Leia would grieve, but she would never forget. Luke had already tried to kill him once. And in Rey's hand, he saw not forgiveness but a mirror. And he couldn't survive seeing himself that clearly. He dropped his gaze. "Join me," he said. His voice cracked. Not with rage, with need. Let it all die, the Jedi, the Sith, the Resistance, the First Order. He reached for her hand, but not to take it, to trade. He offered power in place of peace, rule in place of return. A future built not on healing but on control. Rey's heart broke in her eyes before she pulled away. Kylo saw it. He felt it. And still, he let her go. Because power doesn't require understanding, only surrender. She backed away, breath catching. He could have stopped her. He didn't. Because choosing her would mean choosing himself. And he hadn't forgiven himself enough to do that. She turned. He stood still. The force between them remained. But it no longer spoke. And in the flicker of her retreat, Kylo Ren was left holding a throne. And nothing else. The throne was never meant for him. It sat at the highest point of the command ship, surrounded by metal that swallowed light and walls that echoed with every distant scream of the dying fleet. Snoke had shaped this place to feel like a temple, cold, vast, unforgiving. Kylo Ren walked into it alone. The doors sealed behind him with a hiss that sounded too final, too familiar. He felt the air tighten around his chest. Not from fear, from memory. Because he knew what it meant to stand in a room built for someone else. He had spent his whole life standing in rooms like that. Under Luke's guidance. Under Han's silence. Under Snoke's shadow. Now for the first time, there was no one above him. But instead of rising, he sank. He stood at the base of the throne, staring at it without moving. Fire still clung to his clothes from the fight in the guard's chamber. His hands were scraped, his breath uneven. The battle had ended. The supreme leader was dead. But power did not feel like victory. It felt like ash. General Hux burst into the chamber, face pale, eyes wide with fear and ambition. The kind that wants control but never the weight that comes with it. "Supreme Leader," Hux began. Kylo didn't let him finish. The Force lifted Hux from the ground, pinning him back against the wall with a pressure that stole his breath. Kylo did not raise a hand, did not turn his head. He simply looked at him. For a moment, Kylo didn't see Hux. He saw every voice that had told him what he should be. He saw every command barked at him since childhood. Every expectation. Every disappointment. And in the rise of the pressure, Hux felt it too. Kylo released him just before the panic turned to begging. Hux collapsed, gasping, scrambling to find words. You killed Snoke." Kylo didn't deny it. He stepped past him, reached the base of the throne, and slowly sat. The metal was cold beneath him, hard, heavy, unwelcoming. It fit. Hux bowed quickly, hiding his terror. But beneath that fear lived a calculation one Kylo had expected. Hux would never respect him the way he'd feared Snoke. But he would obey, because obedience was born not from loyalty, but from survival. Kylo leaned back, fingers gripping the carved edges of the throne. He waited for the surge of power. The darkness promised to him. The silence he had killed for. None came. He felt nothing. No triumph. No strength. No satisfaction. Just the echo of Rey turning away, hands slipping from possibility like sand through trembling fingers. He closed his eyes, hoping the throne's weight would crush the conflict inside him. It didn't. The ache remained. The same ache that burned after Han fell, after the temple collapsed, after Luke failed him, after Snoke twisted him into a weapon. Kylo opened his eyes. The throne room looked different now. Not a place of command. A cage with a taller ceiling. He realized something then, not in anger, not in clarity. He had killed Snoke to be free. But freedom without direction was just another prison. Hux approached cautiously, straightening his uniform. The ship shuddered under another explosion outside. The Resistance attacked. The galaxy spun toward chaos. What are your orders?" Hux asked. Kylo looked at him, eyes hollow, jaw clenched. He could command fleets now. He could shape empires. He could silence worlds. He could do anything. Except quiet the boy inside him. Kylo rose from the throne, not because he wanted to, but because sitting on it felt like lying. "Prepare the fleet," he said. His voice was steady. His soul was not. Hux bowed and fled. Kylo stood alone again, facing the empty seat, the one he had claimed through fire and blood. Not a crown. A reminder. Power could be taken, but peace could not. And Kylo Ren had never been further from it. Power changed nothing. The title, Supreme Leader, echoed through the halls of the finalizer, whispered by officers who feared his gaze and shouted by troopers who obeyed without question. Everywhere Kylo walked, soldiers stiffened. Commanders bowed, screens flickered with his orders across entire fleets. And yet, none of it felt real. He had spent years imagining what this moment would bring. Authority. Purpose. Silence. But the silence that greeted him was the wrong kind. Not peaceful. Empty. The kind that made the walls feel wider. The air heavier. The mask unnecessary. Kylo stood on the bridge of the flagship, staring out at the streaks of stars as the fleet emerged from hyperspace. Officers waited behind him, still, tense, terrified. He gave no commands. Not yet. Because strategy didn't matter. Not when the war inside him was louder than the one outside. Snoke had ruled from a throne of shadows, content in the certainty of his own design. Kylo inherited that throne, but not its certainty. He felt it every time he sat, the way metal creaked around him, the way the room felt too big, the way the Force pressed against his spine as if asking, "Is this truly what you wanted?" He never answered, because the truth was too fragile to speak. He saw Snoke when he closed his eyes not as an enemy, but as another master he had failed to understand. Snoke had promised purpose, promised clarity, promised greatness carved from pain. But he died, believing Kylo was incomplete. And Kylo feared he was right. He walked the corridors in long strides, cape trailing behind him, boots striking metal with a cold rhythm. Troopers stepped aside, officers lowered their eyes. None of them mattered. None of them saw him. Not the real him. Only the shape the mask had created. He tried to bury his thoughts beneath work. Inspections, tactical plans, orders for pursuit. He demanded reports on the resistance. He demanded movement on new construction. He demanded anything that kept him moving. Still, the ache followed. It lingered in every pause, every breath, every reflection in the glass where his face, unmasked now more than ever, looked back without understanding who it belonged to. Rey haunted him, not as an enemy, not as a threat, as a question. She had stood beside him in battle, turned away from him in sorrow, left him with a choice he pretended he didn't miss. Kylo tightened his fists. Connection was weakness. Attachment was danger. Care was a wound waiting to open. Snoke had drilled these lessons into him until they echoed louder than the Force. Yet now, with Snoke gone and the First Order under his command, Kylo found the lessons hollow. If power was the answer, why did the questions remain? He retreated to his private chamber, the door sealing behind him with a hiss that sounded almost like a sigh. The room was dark, lit only by a single beam of cold white light from above. Shadows clung to the corners like memories, refusing to leave. He removed his gloves, removed his cape, removed the last layer of armor. He did not sit. He sank to the floor, not with drama, with exhaustion. His hands trembled not from fear, but from weight. The weight of a title he never wanted, the weight of a throne he didn't deserve, the weight of choices he could no longer undo. He reached for his mask. His fingers hovered above it. He should put it on. Become the legend again. Hide the fracture. But tonight, he couldn't. The mask stayed on the ground, still cracked from the hammer he once brought down upon it in rage. Kylo stared at it. And for a moment, he wasn't supreme leader. He wasn't a Sith. He wasn't a monster. He was a boy who thought power would silence his pain. But all it had done was give that pain a throne. Outside, the fleet prepared for war. Inside, the supreme leader sat alone, surrounded by everything he commanded, and nothing he understood. It began without warning. Not a vision, not a dream, a connection. He saw her before she spoke, not physically, not in front of him, but in the Force, clear, present, real. Rey. She was standing somewhere bright. He was somewhere dark. Yet between them, there was no distance, just presence. A thread drawn across stars and silence, pulling them into a space where time didn't exist. Kylo didn't speak, neither did she. But they saw each other. And for the first time since childhood, he wasn't alone inside his own mind. He had heard voices before: Snoke's commands, Luke's lessons, Vader's silence echoing in ancestral memory. But this was different. It wasn't a whisper of manipulation or a trace of past darkness. It was someone seeing him. Not the mask, not the legend, just him. She didn't know how it happened. Neither did he. But the Force had opened a door, and neither of them closed it. He tried to hide the fracture at first, the pull between who he was and who he pretended to be. But the bond wouldn't allow it. It drew from truth, not from will, and truth doesn't wear a mask. Rey's presence felt different from anything he had known. She didn't push. She didn't threaten. She didn't even ask. She observed, like someone looking at a wound, not with judgment, but with understanding. Kylo didn't understand her. She was powerful but untrained, alone but hopeful, broken but not bitter. She asked the galaxy for nothing, and still carried its pain like it was hers to bear. He hated how much of her reminded him of what he used to be. In those first moments, he tried to control the bond, to direct it, to turn it into a weapon, to manipulate the thread between them. But it didn't work. Because Rey wasn't afraid of him. And fear had always been his sharpest edge. She asked him why he killed Han. He didn't answer. Because how do you explain a wound that won't heal? How do you describe the sound a father makes when he forgives you with his final breath? He told her she couldn't understand. She didn't argue. She just looked at him with quiet, painful recognition. And in that gaze, he felt something unfamiliar. Not redemption. Not absolution. Memory. The kind that surfaces when you hear a voice you forgot you missed. She saw the storm in him, and instead of stepping back, she stayed. That was the difference. Others tried to fix him. She simply witnessed him. And something inside Kylo cracked further. He found himself listening. Not to her words, but to her presence. The warmth behind the silence. The pull toward something lighter. Not pure. Not perfect, but honest. He hated it. He wanted to destroy it. But instead, he kept listening. The bond grew stronger each time they touched the Force. Across ships, across planets, across war. Even when they stood on opposite sides of the fight, they remained tethered not by ideology, not by mission, but by something the Jedi never trained him to understand. Recognition. He didn't know what she wanted from him. Maybe she didn't know either. But the bond remained, even when she resisted it, even when he denied it, even when it terrified them both. The Force had drawn a line between two broken souls, and for reasons neither could explain, it held. Not to show them what they were, but to remind them of what they might still become, together or apart. She didn't ask him to remove the mask. She didn't have to. Because Rey never looked at the helmet when she spoke. She looked through it, as if she already knew what was beneath, as if the armor, the voice, the legend, none of it mattered. To her, he was not Kylo Ren. Not really. She called him by the name he had spent a lifetime trying to erase. Ben. The first time she said it, he didn't react. Not with anger, with silence. Because something deeper than fear stirred in him. Something fragile. Something he hadn't felt since the temple burned. Recognition. She had no right to that name. And yet, It felt like it belonged to her more than it belonged to him. Because Rey had seen what no one else dared to look for, not the mask, but the boy beneath it. And she hadn't turned away. He told himself she was trying to manipulate him, that she saw weakness and wanted to exploit it. But the Force doesn't lie. And in the Force, he felt her sincerity. It terrified him. Because all his life, power had come through fear, through silence, through commanding others to see him not as a person, but as something more. But Rey saw him as less, not diminished, human, and that was harder to bear. In one of their visions, the Force bridged them again, sudden, intimate, uninvited. He stood in the chamber of his ship, she in the heart of Arch-2. Rain poured through the bond, dripping on his gloves. She gasped. He only watched. She asked why the Force connected them. He didn't know. He still doesn't. But in that moment, her eyes locked on his, unblinking, unafraid. And Kylo did something he hadn't done since childhood. He lowered his defenses. Not as a tactic, as a response. He removed the glove from his hand, held it up, bare, no saber, no threat, just skin, just presence, just the quiet confession of a soul trying, for once, not to be alone. She didn't reach back, but she didn't look away. The connection deepened. The next time it happened, he was the one to take off the mask. He did it slowly, deliberately, not for control, not for dominance, not for theater. He wanted her to see. And more than that, he wanted to be seen. Rey didn't flinch. She didn't recoil from the scar or the weight in his expression. She didn't speak. She simply watched. Not like an enemy, like someone searching for something. Maybe for the boy buried beneath the ruin. Maybe for the part of herself reflected in his silence. And Kylo hated that she found it. Because she wasn't supposed to understand. Understanding led to closeness. Closeness led to care. And care led to pain. But the Force between them didn't care about what was supposed to happen. It revealed what was. Not to condemn him. To confront him. And every time she called him Ben, it didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like an invitation. To return. To remember. To try. He told her it was too late. She never said otherwise. She just kept seeing him. And the more she looked, the harder it became to keep the mask on, not physically, but emotionally. Because it no longer protected him from the world. It protected the world from him. And Rey, she wasn't afraid of the monster. She feared the man who had become one. Because she knew in the quiet between battles, in the space between breaths, Ben Solo still existed. And she knew what Kylo Ren feared more than the light. Was the truth that maybe she was right. Crate was already dying when they arrived. A world of white salt and red earth, cracked open by time, war, and the weight of choices no one could undo. The Resistance hid inside an old rebel outpost. The First Order prepared to crush what remained. And between them stood a bond neither side could understand. Kylo Ren and Rey had shared visions, breath, silence. They had seen each other in ways the galaxy never would. But the Force had not brought them together for peace. It had brought them to a battlefield. Kylo stepped from his command shuttle, cloak dragging across the salt, boots carving lines that glowed red beneath the surface. Every step felt heavy, not with armor, with memory. Rey was somewhere inside the base, close, watching, hoping. He felt her presence like a heartbeat behind stone. She had offered him a future on the supremacy. He had offered her a throne. Now they faced a moment neither had chosen. The walkers thundered across the plain, cannons aimed at the bunker. Hux barked orders with artificial confidence. Pilots prepared for the final strike. Kylo did none of these things. He simply stared at the entrance. Because he knew she was on the other side. And he knew she was conflicted too. Not with hatred, with grief. Luke's hologram had told her the truth. Kylo would come. Not for strategy. For closure. The doors blew open. Resistance fighters spilled onto the field. Kylo raised his saber. But Rey was not among them. Not yet. She didn't want this fight. Neither did he. The Force bridged them again, brief, flickering, raw. A flash of her eyes. A breath that wasn't his. A question unspoken. Why? He didn't answer. Couldn't. Because he didn't know if she wanted him to stop. Or wanted him to choose. The battle roared around them. X-wings fell. Walkers advanced. Poe shouted orders through static-filled comms. Rose and Finn charged a cannon far too large for hope. But Kylo barely heard any of it. He was listening to the Force. To her. When Luke appeared in the doorway, Kylo felt something inside him twist. A thread pulled tight. A wound reopened. Not because Luke was his target. Because Luke was his failure. Rey watched from inside the base, heart pounding. She didn't understand why Luke came alone. Why he looked younger. Why he walked with calm steps toward the one who had destroyed everything he built. Kylo marched out to meet him. Sabers hummed. Salt rose like smoke. Destiny shifted beneath their feet. It wasn't a duel. Not truly. Kylo struck with anger. Luke moved with apology. Kylo attacked to kill. Luke stood to buy time. Kylo demanded answers. Luke offered forgiveness. Rey felt every moment through the Force, the rage, the sorrow, the memory, and she knew what Luke was doing. He wasn't fighting Kylo. He was saving him. Not with a blade. With a lesson. And Kylo hated him for it. Because Luke had abandoned him once. And now he claimed to understand what he had become. Kylo screamed and swung. A final strike. A final wound. A final break. And his saber passed through nothing. Luke was a projection. A ghost born of the Force. And as Kylo realized the truth, the battle ended. The resistance escaped through the back tunnels. Rey lifted the stones with trembling hands. Survivors fled into the caves and out into the night. Kylo stood alone on the battlefield he had won. But victory felt like loss. Loss felt like memory. Memory felt like her. Through the bond, Rey appeared once more silent, breath steady, eyes full of something he didn't deserve. Not hate. Disappointment. She closed the Falcon's door. And for the first time in his life, Kylo Ren felt the Force let go. Not completely. Just enough for him to understand. The battle was never between the light and the dark. It was between the man he wanted to be. And the man he feared he already was. The Falcon's ramp lifted, sealing Rey behind its walls of rusted metal and fading hope. Kylo stood alone on the salted ground, wind sweeping across the battlefield like a final breath over a grave. The echoes of blaster fire faded into the distance. The walkers powered down. The planet fell silent. The war had paused. But the ache inside him did not. He stared at the spot where Rey had stood, not because he expected her to return, but because something inside him refused to accept she was gone. Their bond, once bright, uninvited, alive felt different now. Not broken, dimmed. A door almost closed, but not locked. Kylo tried to calm his breathing. He tried to reach out through the Force the way Snoke had taught him, sharp, focused, in control. But control was not what the bond obeyed. It responded only to truth. And his truth was fractured. Rey was leaving. Because she had seen everything. Not just his violence. Not just his choices. She had seen him. The boy with trembling hands. The young man searching for a place to belong. The child who wanted warmth more than power. And knowing that hurt more than any wound. Because you can't hide from someone who looks at you without fear. He took a step toward the closing ship, even though she was already gone. His fingers curled as if reaching for her name in the air. But the only thing that reached back was the wind. For a moment, he closed his eyes. And the bond opened. Quick, soft, unavoidable. Rey appeared not in body, not in vision, but in presence. A quiet glow surrounded by darkness. Her breath steady, her heartbeat calm. Her eyes watching him through the shared space between them. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Words were too heavy now. Too sharp. Too fragile. But the Force carried something anyway. A name. Ben. Not shouted. Not pleaded. Not demanded. Whispered. A reminder. A truth spoken so gently, it felt like a hand brushing against the side of his face. Ben Solo. He flinched, not from pain, but from recognition. Because no matter how far he had run, no matter how deep he had buried the boy, Rey had found him. And she refused to let him disappear. He opened his eyes. She was gone. The bond faded back into shadow. But the whisper stayed. It lingered in the dust. In the quiet. In the corners of his thoughts where the mask could not reach. Ben. It was not a challenge. Not a judgment. A possibility. The kind he didn't know how to accept. Kylo looked up at the sky as the falcon pierced the clouds, a streak of light vanishing into the void. She had left him behind. She had chosen her path. She had chosen hope. But she hadn't chosen to erase him. That was the part he didn't understand. Rey should have hated him. Should have feared him. Should have shut the bond forever. Instead, she gave him something far heavier. Grace. The one thing he never learned to carry. As the last engines faded, Kylo felt the Force settle around him, soft, dim, patient, not pushing him toward light or shadow. Simply watching. Waiting. Because a whisper is not a command. It's an invitation. And Rey had invited him to remember who he was before the world told him what to become. He turned away from the battlefield. Soldiers stepped aside. Officers stiffened. Hux glared. The First Order awaited his orders with cold obedience. But Kylo didn't feel like a supreme leader in that moment. He felt like a name whispered across light. A name he wasn't ready to claim. Not yet, but someday. Maybe. Ben Solo might answer. Leia Organa had never feared death. She had seen it too many times on Alderaan, on Hoth, on Crate. She had watched friends fall, enemies rise, and entire star systems turn to ash. But nothing frightened her more than losing her son. Not to war, not to darkness, to himself. Ben had vanished into Kylo Ren long before the galaxy gave him that name. Leia felt the moment he broke, the night the temple fell, the hour he stepped into Snoke's shadow. But she never stopped reaching for him, even when the Force fell silent between them. A mother's bond does not obey distance. It waits. It watches. It hopes. And on that final day, when the resistance held on by threads and the First Order closed in, Leia felt something she had never felt before: a stillness. Not peace. Ending. She lay on her cot, surrounded by fading lights and worried faces. Poe watched. Chewbacca stood with helpless ache. Rey felt something slipping from the galaxy but did not know whose light was dimming. Leia did. Her time in the fight was over. But her last mission had never been military. It had never been political. It had never been about the resistance or the war or even the galaxy. Her last mission was her son. She whispered one word. Ben. It was barely a breath. A sound shaped by love, memory, and a lifetime of waiting. It left her lips and drifted into the Force like a spark in darkness. It did not travel far. It didn't need to. Because she wasn't calling Kylo Ren. She was calling the boy. The one who laughed on her lap as a toddler, gripping her fingers with small hands. The one who fell asleep against Han's chest during long flights. The one she left with Luke, believing he would be safe. Ben Solo. Her son. Her hope. Her heartbreak. Leia reached deeper into the Force than she ever had before. Not with power, but with gentleness. She didn't push. She didn't pull. She simply touched the thread that connected them. The one that had frayed and stretched but never snapped. And Ben felt it. Not as a command, as warmth. He stood on the shattered ruins of the second Death Star, drenched in rain, saber humming, heart fractured. Rey faced him with fire in her eyes, their blades crossing like fate refusing to bend. Then he heard it. Soft, distant, fading. Ben. His grip faltered. His breath caught. The light inside him, the one he had buried beneath death and rage and vows, flickered. Rey saw it before he did. His stance shifted, his expression cracked. For a moment, Kylo Ren wasn't standing in front of her. Ben Solo was. He didn't understand why. Didn't know how. But he felt her voice. Not spoken aloud. Spoken in love. A mother's final call. It carried everything he had lost: home, warmth, belonging, forgiveness, wrapped into a single whisper. And when he felt it, something inside him collapsed. The hatred loosened. The darkness thinned. The mask he wore inside himself shattered. Rey's blade pierced his side. He barely reacted. Not because he was strong. Because the pain of the wound was nothing compared to the ache that rose in him as Leia's presence slipped away. She was leaving. For him. Ben fell to his knees, saber dropping from his hand, eyes wide, not with anger, with grief. Real grief. The kind he hadn't allowed himself to feel since he was a boy. And through the Force, like a fading star, Leia whispered one last truth. You were never lost. He reached for her presence. It was already dimming. The galaxy around him blurred as the bond between them closed, not in abandonment, but in peace. Leia Organa took her final breath. And Ben Solo took his first. The first he had taken without the weight of Kylo Ren. Ben Solo stood on the edge of ruin. His body was broken. His soul was silent. Blood ran from the wound Rey had struck, a wound he hadn't tried to block. A wound he had, in some way, accepted. Because when Leia died, something in him died too. Not love. Not memory. Kylo Ren. The name no longer held shape. It no longer fit. Not after the voice of his mother reached him across the stars, across time. across the wall he had built between who he was and what he became. He collapsed into the wreckage of the old Death Star, alone, drenched in rain and silence. And that's where Rey found him. But she didn't strike again. She didn't run. She placed her hand gently on his chest and healed him. With the Force, but not just the Force. With choice. With compassion. With the same truth Leia had given, the truth that the past did not erase the person inside it. He opened his eyes and saw her standing there. Not like an opponent. Not like a savior. Like someone who saw what he had hidden his entire life. Rey didn't speak. She didn't need to. The bond between them hummed one last time. Not filled with visions, not twisted by the dark. Just presence. Quiet. Real. Forgiving. She stepped back. Took the saber. And left. Ben watched her go. And for a long moment, he did nothing. He felt the ache of his scar, the emptiness of his title, the final breath of his mother, still echoing like a lullaby he couldn't stop hearing. Then he looked down at the hilt still lying in the wreckage. The crossguard saber. His saber. The weapon forged in rage. Built from a cracked crystal. Fueled by a cracked soul. He picked it up. Felt its weight. It no longer felt like a part of him. It felt like a curse. Like a mask he could no longer wear. Ben stood at the edge of a broken platform. The ocean roared beneath him, waves slamming against steel. Wind tore at his robes. Lightning flickered in the distance, casting long shadows across the rusted debris. He held the saber out. The hilt shook in his hand, not from the storm, but from the tremble in his fingers. Kylo Ren would not have hesitated, but Ben Solo was not rushing. Because this was not about release. It was about responsibility. A silent act that no one would see. A goodbye to the thing that had defined his life. He didn't speak. He didn't breathe. He let go. The saber fell, spinning through the air, its broken crystal dim, its edges catching rain as it plunged into the sea. It disappeared beneath the surface without a sound. And in that moment, something lifted. Not guilt. Guilt would remain. But the need to be Kylo Ren, that need broke apart like metal pulled under the waves. Ben closed his eyes. He didn't feel clean. He didn't feel whole. But for the first time in years, he felt true. Not a pawn of Snoke. Not the shadow of Vader. Not the echo of a temple burning. Just a man. Alone. Alive. Ben stepped back from the edge. The sea roared behind him, swallowing the last proof of who he had been. He didn't know what came next. He didn't know who he would be without the mask, the name, the fear. But he knew one thing. Kylo Ren was dead. And Ben Solo had taken his place. Ben Solo did not rise with triumph. He rose with grief. Rain fell across the wreckage, cold and heavy, washing the blood from his clothes and the ash from his skin. He placed a hand against the broken metal to steady himself. Not because of the wound Rey healed, but because of the one she couldn't. Leia. Her presence, once a quiet warmth in the Force, had faded into silence. Not gone. Not extinguished. Just beyond reach. And Ben felt the emptiness left behind like a child searching for a hand he had let go of too many times. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Not from pain. From memory. He remembered her laughter on Chandrila, the way she held him close when he was frightened, the way she forgave him even before he asked. He remembered Han's arm around them both, pulling them into the cockpit of the Falcon, calling them his family, pretending the galaxy couldn't split them apart. Ben had spent years running from these memories. Now they were all he had left. He walked across the wreckage slowly, each step feeling like he was relearning how to move. Without the armor, without the mask, without the voices shaping him, he felt exposed painfully, honestly exposed. Every choice he had made lay in front of him now. Every betrayal, every wound, every moment he had tried to silence the boy inside him. That boy was awake again, and he did not know how to carry Ben Solo's name. He reached for the Force. It answered not with darkness, not with whispers, not with orders. With quiet, a stillness he had never known. The dark side had always demanded from him strength, obedience, sacrifice. But now, the Force simply waited, as if asking, "What will you choose, Ben?" He had no answer. He wandered the corridors of the shattered Death Star until he found a broken chamber half filled with water. He sat on the fallen debris, bent forward, head in his hands. Not crying, just breathing. Slow, deep breaths he hadn't taken in years. He didn't feel like a supreme leader. He didn't feel like a Jedi. He felt like a boy who had finally stopped running, standing in the ruins of everything he once believed would make him strong. Ben lifted his head, and for the first time, he looked at his reflection in the water, distorted, rippled, unsteady. Not Kylo Ren. Not Vader's heir. Just Ben. His scar shone faintly beneath the rain. His eyes were tired but not empty. He saw guilt. He saw sorrow. But he also saw something he had not seen since he was young. Possibility. He stood again. Slowly. His legs trembled, but he didn't fall. His breath wavered, but he didn't retreat. He pressed a hand to the wall and whispered into the silence, "I'm sorry." No one heard him. But apology isn't always meant for others. Sometimes it's meant for the person you finally allow yourself to be. He followed the pull of the Force through the wreckage until he reached a cracked opening overlooking the ocean. The sky was gray. The wind was cold. But he felt something warm moving through the cosmos. Rey's presence, distant but alive. She had chosen the light. She had chosen hope. But she had also chosen to save him. Not because he deserved it, but because she believed he could rise. Ben closed his eyes, letting the wind hit his face. He didn't know if redemption was possible. He didn't know if forgiveness could be earned. He didn't know if the galaxy would ever see him as anything but a monster. But he knew this. He was done hiding behind Kylo Ren. Done running from Ben Solo. Done letting the past decide the shape of his future. He stepped away from the ruins. Not as a warrior. Not as a leader. As a person trying finally to be himself. And with each step, the boy grew stronger. Because Ben Solo had returned. Not in triumph. In truth. Ben Solo didn't rise in the light. He rose in shadow. The resistance was losing. Palpatine had returned not as a ghost, but as a body stitched from hatred and dark science. His final order spread across the stars like a second death. And somewhere, in the heart of Exegol's storm, Rey stood alone. Ben didn't know how he found her. He didn't follow a map. He followed a feeling. The Force had opened to him again, but not like before. It no longer bent to his anger. It no longer answered his commands. It simply moved like breath, like instinct, like home. He took a stolen TIE fighter and flew into the unknown. Not to save Rey, not to be forgiven, not to rewrite history. He came because there was no one else. He came because his mother had believed, because Rey had stayed, because Leia had given her last breath, not to destroy darkness but to awaken the part of him that could walk toward light without shame. Ben arrived with no weapon, no army, no name the galaxy would accept. And still, he ran. Through the temples, through the cultists, through the throne room where Palpatine waited like death incarnate. Rey lay on the floor, motionless. The Emperor laughed. The resistance was burning. Ben didn't speak. He didn't shout. He moved. And in his final fight, he wasn't guided by fury or legacy or fear. He fought for someone else. He fought for her. Side by side, they rose against a power older than either of them understood. Dyad in the Force two made one. Light and dark no longer at war, but fused, not for domination, for balance. Ben stood at her side. Then he fell. Palpatine's lightning ripped through him, hurled him into the abyss, as if the dark side itself refused his return. But he survived. Not because he was strong. Because he still had something left to give. He climbed from the pit with nothing but will. No blade. No armor. He reached Rey's lifeless body, kneeled beside her, and placed a hand on her chest. She had saved him not with power, but with belief. Now he would do the same. Ben closed his eyes and gave everything. Not in battle, not in revenge, in peace. His life moved through the Force into hers. His strength, his breath, his hope. And when her eyes opened, when the light returned, he smiled. Not as Kylo Ren, not as the heir of Vader, as Ben Solo. Rey whispered his name. It didn't hurt to hear it anymore. He touched her cheek. She held him. And in that quiet, final moment, he was whole. Then he faded. No scream, no resistance. Ben Solo became one with the Force. Not because he was a Jedi. Because he had finally chosen truth. He left no monument, no grave. Only a memory in the one person who had seen him from the start. Rey looked to the sky as his body vanished into light. She did not cry. She carried him forward. Ben Solo died in silence. But not alone. Because in the end, the boy who once burned a temple had given his life to save one soul. And through that gift, his name was reborn. Not in legend, in legacy. A name no longer spoken in shame, but in memory. Ben Solo, the last son of the Skywalker bloodline. The one who fell, the one who returned, the one who found peace not by destroying darkness, but by letting go of it. There was no celebration. No resistance fighter carved his name into stone. No monument rose from the ashes. No tale of glory echoed through the halls of victory. Ben Solo died on Exegol, far from the stars he once dreamed under, far from the family that loved him. He died not in battle, but in surrender, in silence, in peace. He was not a hero. He had killed too many, betrayed too much, left too many scars on the galaxy. But he wasn't a villain anymore either. The darkness that had consumed him for so long had fallen quiet, not defeated, not destroyed, just released. There were no final words, no last breath, only a hand reaching toward Rey and the gift of everything he had left. He smiled once, just once, then vanished into the Force. His body left no trace, no armor, no lightsaber, no crown, just absence. But in that absence, something lingered, not power, not legend, but a question. Who was Ben Solo, really? A boy broken by legacy? A warrior shaped by fear? A name lost beneath a mask? Or a soul who, in his final moment, chose not to take but to give? He didn't become a Jedi. He didn't redeem the past. He simply made one final choice. And sometimes, that's enough. Ben Solo. A name carried more like a burden than a gift. It was never just his. It belonged to the galaxy before he ever spoke it. To Leia Organa. To Han Solo. To Luke Skywalker. It was stitched together from rebellion and royalty, from Jedi and scoundrel, from hope and war. Before he was old enough to choose who he wanted to be, the galaxy had already decided. He would be powerful. He would be noble. He would be like them. But he wasn't. He was quiet, angry, afraid of the force that stirred in him, afraid of what it might mean. And that fear made room for another voice, one that didn't ask him to live up to a name. One that simply called him something else. Kylo Ren. That name asked nothing of him. No expectations. No legacy. Just rage. Just silence. Just control. He wore it like armor. Spoke it like a weapon. Let it separate him from everything Ben Solo had loved: his mother, his father, his uncle, himself. But names are never the truth. They're just masks we wear until someone sees behind them. Leia saw. Rey saw. In the end, he saw it too. The galaxy never said his name. But in the Force, it echoes now. Not as Kylo. As Ben. The boy who once ran from himself. Now, finally still. The Force does not forget. It holds more than power. It carries memory, pain, love, choice. It remembers Ben Solo. Not through statues or stories whispered by Jedi, but through presence. He became one with the current, not as a figure to be worshipped, but as a life returned to balance. A soul once pulled apart, finally made whole. There are no shadows where he is now. No voices whispering from the dark. No masks. No thrones. Only stillness. Only peace. The Force remembers how he reached for his mother's voice in the silence. How he gave his last breath so someone else could take theirs. How he let go of the anger he once thought made him strong. And in that letting go, the dark side lost its grip. It did not shatter. It simply passed. Like wind through open hands. Some Force ghosts return to guide, to teach, to warn. Ben does not return. Not yet. Not now. Perhaps he walks among the trees of Endor. Perhaps he drifts in the stars above Chandrila. Perhaps he lingers in the echoes of a lightsaber igniting blue, not red. But wherever he is not gone. Because the Force remembers what he chose. And that choice to save, not destroy, leaves a light that cannot be buried. There are no more Skywalkers. No heirs. No bloodline. No ancient saber passed to a new hand. The name ends with him. But legacy isn't just blood. It's choice. And Ben Solo's final choice echoes louder than any throne ever built. He gave his life, not for the Jedi. Not for redemption. Not even for forgiveness. He gave it for Rey. For the girl who saw him, not as a monster, not as a weapon, but as a person still capable of returning. She called him Ben when no one else did. She held his face when all he had known was pain. She lit the match, but he walked through the fire. And when the galaxy rose again, when Rey stood alone beneath the twin suns, she chose a name. Not to claim a legacy, but to honor it. Skywalker. Not because she was born to it, but because someone died for it. Ben's story didn't end in power. It ended in peace. Not in triumph, but in truth. There will be no academy bearing his name. No rebellion led in his shadow. Only a memory of a boy once lost in darkness, who walked into the storm and came out whole. The last Skywalker did not conquer the galaxy. He gave it hope, and then he was gone. But the Force remembers, and so will we. Ben Solo, the name that rose from ruin and returned to the light.